Apologies.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together and talk about issues from political to cultural, silly to serious. Hopefully, Not So Erudites realize we're live. I'll DM her again, and we can get these things going. But in the meantime, hello, chat. Welcome. Welcome to the show. Nice to see you, 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜. You are indeed first. Nice to see you, Kiri, Ginger and Moss, Sleek DMC, Jenny Burns, Wolf Glenn, Sad Kit Kat. 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜, first time chatter. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, one and all. This should be an interesting show. To those on the YouTube side, if you're watching, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see. How is the audio, gang? Can everyone hear me? Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Everyone here can hear me, but the chat. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, with that, yeah, today we're going to talk about a wide variety of topics. This was brought to me by Aaron, one of our guests, who asked me to host a show on Xenogenders. And in the discussion that ensued, we broadened the list of topics to include also self-ID and diagnosis, as well as passing and what that is. Let me just get, excuse the kind of scuffed thing here, but let me make sure Erudite knows we're live. Hold on. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. In the meantime, how's everyone doing? Say hi to my audience. Entertain them while I do this.
Audience.
Hi.
Hello.
Audience.
I'm your YouTuber representation.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm nervous. Still, like my tummy's turning, but maybe I'm hoping that passes.
Jenny, we are live right now. So, okay, yeah.
Oops.
A little scuffed, but we do what we can. Okay, well, hopefully she gets here soon. Zonia will be joining us as well, but she has DM'd me, and she is running late. Whoever was just talking is way lower than you. Can you guys talk a little more so I can normalize this on the audio? So, Techno, can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, I can say
hello. I'm Technopolis.
Keep talking so I'll make sure it's...
I'm non-binary and assigned male at birth.
Okay.
And,
yeah. Okay, I think we got it. If there's still problems as we go, gang, let me know. I will do my best to adjust these issues. Okay, and we'll get things rolling. But yeah, I appreciate it. Yesterday I was talking to Brittany, and apparently halfway through someone messaged me and said, "Oh, no one can hear you." And so we had quite a bit of time where no one could hear me, right? And that was a problem. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I've done that once before. I had somebody on for an interview, and later found that while it was going fine on the live stream, the recording did not have her audio at all. So I had to completely trash the interview, and it was a very big disappointment. But
it is what it is. Erudite, hello.
Hey, sorry about that. Just changing.
All good. No, probably best you do that off the air, right?
Or on the air, depending on how many views I have.
Well, we'd get more viewers, that's true. But yeah, so again, topic's pretty simple tonight. Zonia will be late. She messaged me when she gets here. We'll throw her in. But with that, I think we've had enough introductions that we could just kind of get to the topic at hand. And so I guess I'd ask, starting out, the first thing I'd like to know, and then you can answer the question. I'd like each of you to answer this, and then you can give your opening statements, opening thoughts as well as you answer this question. Are xenogenders valid? What I mean by that, should they be something that we as a society take seriously? We're going to start with Ancom, Psycom. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion that there are potentially as many genders as there are people in this world. Everyone's experience of gender is going to be unique to them. The idea of, having these especially broad categories that encompass a lot of people, it can help people find others who share similar experiences. And so not everyone's going to have the same experience of gender, and some people very well may have an experience that falls well outside the typical man-woman dichotomy that our society currently tends to recognize. So I think that there are going to be plenty of people who, when they feel like they fall outside that particular paradigm, they're going to look for other paradigms, other words, other descriptions for, that more closely match their feeling, and those are likely going to fall into this category of xenogender. So I see no reason not to take them seriously when it comes to, people telling.
I don't mean to interrupt.
Their own experience.
I don't mean to interrupt. But can you tell my audience what xenogender is? I just realized people may not know.
That's all right. So typically, xenogenders are defined as genders which fall well outside the typical man-woman dichotomy, but also can sometimes be considered a subclass of non-binary, or could be off that particular spectrum altogether. Often it has to do with people saying that they experience their gender in something that is altogether non-human, whether that be something related to an animal, perhaps a fictional or mythological creature, or some form of alien, something like that.
Okay, well, thanks. We'll get into it in the open. I appreciate your thoughts, and we'll talk about it as we go. Next up, 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, are you ready? You seem flustered. You good?
Yeah, sorry, I'm good. Sorry, my I got like super nauseous like 15 minutes before starting. So
you gonna be okay?
Yeah, I should be. I'm gonna grab Tums after my opening. That's why I'm like flustering around.
We can skip you, and you can go get Tums now if you'd like.
That'd be great. Yeah, let me get my water.
Please do.
Up and my Tums and
absolutely, go ahead. In the meantime, Tama from the Florence system, please.
Hey, I am Tama of the Florence system. I have been doing volunteer work in trans advocacy and activism for the last several years on the subject of xenogenders. I feel like we somewhat lose the plot, where it's either where it is a very binary issue of it has to be trans and valid, or nothing at all. I think that it's a form of identity. I think that we should respect it to some extent. But if you look into the history of the xenogender movement, it is a social contagion. It was not created to describe a phenomena that was existing. It is the fear that a lot of parents have of what is going to happen to their children in this movement. I think that xenogenders, the whole issue, it seems like a niche internet thing, but in reality, I am concerned. I feel like if we allow something that is very easily demonstrable as a social contagion into trans activism and essentialize it into trans activism, people are not going to be able to tell the difference between the social contagion of trans and the actual trans. I think that they should be allowed to advocate for their identity, but tagging themselves along in the trans group is not good. We're seeing a huge backlash of late in all of this anti-trans legislation. And if we start to permit this particular thing in the movement, it validates most of the narratives that exist against us. I really hope that they could live their truth, and I really advocate that they should be respected, but I don't want to call them trans. I think it's a threat.
Okay, so the TLDR is you think that they are valid but should not be labeled trans? Is that a fair recap? Yeah. Just briefly, yes or no? Okay. Next up, we'll get to it in the open, I'm sure. Next up, we have Technopolis, please.
Hi, I'm Technopolis. I'm assigned male at birth and non-binary. And on the subject of xenogenders, I like I think they're valid to the individual, but it's difficult for me personally to understand the urge to use these
Sure.
pronouns and identities. But I disagree that we shouldn't put them under the trans umbrella.
Got you. Well, thank you for being here, and I'm sure we'll get into the discussion as we go. Last but certainly not least for now, Aaron. Well, no, we skipped Erudite. We'll get to Aaron, then the Erudite. So Aaron, then Erudite. Aaron, go ahead.
Hi. So my name is Aaron. I used to run a little podcast called Transmedia, where I talked about
Just real quick, you're roboting.
interviews with other trans people and stuff like that.
Before you go too far, no one can understand you. You're roboting. Can you try again?
Yeah. Can you hear me any better now?
It's if
Can you check if your connection is stable or something? That might be causing it. It's still roboting, to be clear.
Can you hear me now?
It's not. Okay, well,
Oh.
okay, for now. This is Scuff Gang. We'll do our best we can. Hopefully we can adjust this. But for now, Erudite, please.
Yeah, sure. Valid is a tricky word because I think we moralize that word a lot. Right? So like if somebody says that they're xenogender, I'm not going to be like, oh, you're not a human anymore. You have no human value, right? I agree. It's not part of the trans movement and it's actively harmful to the trans movement. I also don't care. I don't care about xenogenders. I don't think anyone's interested. I don't think people are going to care about it for like at least 20 years. If it becomes like a thing that society is interested in the future and there's like a really big space of like some sort of xenogender stuff, I think we can talk about it, but like xenogenders aren't genders. They're just not actually genders. And to lump it in with the trans movement, I think is like so grossly harmful. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I don't even know how it got lumped in with the trans movement at all.
I guess we'll just
yeah.
we'll discuss it as we go. Aaron, let's try again. Go for it. Oh no. Oh no, gang. Oh no. Aaron, come on. You got this. I believe in you. Okay.
Maybe Aaron can go out and go back in. Is that possible?
I don't know if she can hear us or she's still here. Oh well.
I want to swap.
She'll do that. We may need okay. Hold on. I might need a replacement if this is going to be a thing, but that's okay. I have someone in mind. But yeah. I guess we'll just start the discussion then. So, harmful to the trans. Well, first of all, what does everyone here think about xenogenders aren't really genders? So, Ancom, Psycom, you mentioned how you think there are as many genders as there are people. Do you think that all genders are valid? Like, if there's an infinite amount of genders, are they infinitely inclusive? Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that, like Erudite said, the word valid is tricky because there definitely is an amount of moralizing that happens with that. To me, validity in terms of gender is literally just, honestly, it is about what you feel. And I realize, a lot of people don't like the touchy-feely side of that, but ultimately that's kind of what all gender is. Even the typical binary man-woman thing, like people can be very touchy about their gender and about the roles that are that surround them, in relation to that.
A white woman's dog.
What?
Sorry, you'll hear 𝕵𝖎𝖎 in the background. 𝕵𝖎𝖎 is my spouse. We share an office, so occasionally they will pipe up in the background in response to something I'm saying.
Okay, well, if we can adjust that, because that's going to be distracting, please.
I will, yeah.
Thank you.
But anyways, as far as valid goes, like, I think, people should feel free to, explore how they feel about their own gender and about their place within the broader society, and whatever that, whatever form that takes, I think is just as valid as any other.
Okay, so I want to push back on this. So at the beginning, so to be clear, xenogender people are coming in on the trans movement. So I'd like to start with how the trans movement has historically engaged with gender. And historically, our goal has been to be able to integrate into a social category, gender, that we are not assigned at birth. So people who are assigned male are trying to get into the female category. They're trying to participate in society, fulfilling already existing social gender roles as a female. And then people who are assigned female birth are trying to perform in the male category. And that's how this all started. Gender, as we've been engaging with it, and as we are talking about when it comes to the transgender movement, has been about the ability to integrate into a gender or into a role for more than just what you were assigned at birth. And when it comes to this, we're talking about...
So why can't that include xenogenders? Just to be really clear, to cut this off a little bit.
Well, yeah, I was about to answer that. Because gender is cultural. We're talking about already existing social roles. There's no social role for a deer gender person. And in fact, when you get like deer gender, dragon gender, cat gender, all these people, they don't have an explanation for what social roles they're supposed to be fulfilling. They don't talk to you about how they're supposed to be integrated into society. And even worse, some of their contradictions some of their words are contradictions. So some of them will use cat gender to say that they're some flavor of female. Some of them will say some flavor of male. That means that the word doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't have the same use that male and female do. And like we end up it becomes private language that people are expecting to make public.
Right.
And that's another issue I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the idea that like there's as many genders as there are people. It's like, no, there's as many gendered experiences as there are people, because everyone has their own unique constellation of their interpersonal experience with themselves and their gender. But that doesn't mean that societally we just have the same number of genders as people, right? Like we can't conflate these things. Just for example, like I have a very unique experience with my personality, but that doesn't mean that they're like that we would like have these personality categories created and opened up with pronouns attached to it that like is a requirement of society to engage with, just because I have like this unique constellation of what I feel like my personality is, right? Like gender is a functional thing. In a lot of ways, it's pragmatically functional in society.
Sure, that's how it works now. That's how it works now, and that's how it works before. But if the function why can it not simply be, this is how I feel, this is how I choose to express, and as long as what I'm asking you isn't onerous, right? Why not accept someone who identifies as a cat or a dog?
I think you should accept them, but if we're talking about acceptance in the level that is required, so to be clear, they're saying that they are trans, which means that they're advocating for the same rights and abilities. The thing is, it is onerous.
What rights would you take away from
many
them?
Categories.
What rights would you not allow them to have?
They don't need to medically transition, right? Like a large portion of trans advocacy is about making sure that there are policies available so that trans people have access to medical care. Xenogenders don't need that. They're not asking for it, right? There isn't, for example, xenogender dysphoria, right? This is the crazy shit. A lot of xenogenders, people will be like, I'm a deer gender, but I'm a doe. So I'm like, so you're a girl deer? That's not, so you're a girl, and you're a deer, right? Like it's meaningless. Gender communicates things. You can feel any way that you'd like to feel, but at a societal level, when we're talking about advocacy, right, which the trans movement is largely about their own self-advocacy, xenogenders are jumping in and like just taking away from the argument. Like, this is the worst. Every trans person knows when you're talking to conservatives about like how just a trans woman is a real person and a real thing that we should care about, they always bring up xenogenders, and it's fucking annoying because you're like, yeah, you're right. Identifying as a vampire is fucking dumb, and it has nothing to do with gender at all.
Hey, speaking of xenogenders jumping in, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah,
your audio is much better.
You're much
Thank you.
clearer now.
Great. I'm so sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Just a little catch up. My name is Erin. I identified as a tree gender person, but I kind of want to jump onto what Erudite said, in that there are just as many different experiences of gender than there are people. So the way I kind of used it myself was as kind of an additive, like a descriptor almost. So like, when I say like I'm tree gender or whatever, I don't necessarily think that I'm actually a tree or anything like that. But I strive to kind of perform that as my role as a woman, in that I want to be kind of nurturing and providing and stuff like that. So that's the way I see it and the way I've used it. I realize that not everybody is the same way, but that's my experience of it anyway.
So this is kind of what I was saying. It seems like xenogenders, and this is why I absolutely believe that it's an experience people are having, and that we can have some room to talk about it and like validate those experiences. But it seems to be mapping onto a different ID category that isn't entirely gender. It's maybe a supplement to gender. That much I could kind of like understand. But it is very much a private language in the way that gender is not. So I don't think that we should like hate or disrespect or shit on xenogender people. I just don't think that it's the same as a transgender identity. So like lumping it in with transness, I think is like, I think it's missing the point of what transness is or what gender is.
Go ahead. Give it a try, Technopolis. But then I have a question as well. Go ahead, Techno.
Oh, okay. I'm forgetting the word for it right now, but when we talk about people identifying as like animals or mythical creatures,
Xenogender,
isn't there like an actual like
Are you referring to Otherkin?
yeah isn't aren't don't otherkin don't some of them actually believe they're these beings?
Yes.
And
On a
in
non-physical
that
level.
in that case, like since we can't get in their head, shouldn't we like strategically just believe what they're saying about themselves?
Well, there's
And,
a difference. Go ahead. Sorry.
And yeah, I'm not sure if Xenogenders is connected to that in any way, but
There's a big difference between believing what somebody says about themselves, which, to be honest, we shouldn't just believe what people say about themselves. For example, when somebody tells you, trust me, I'm very objective, I can guarantee you should not believe them. They're fucking lying to you, okay? They're the least objective motherfucker you're ever gonna meet. Same with people who are like, trust me, I'm a really honest person. That bitch is gossiping about you and backstabbing and lying about you all the time, okay? We can't trust people at their word, right? We have to be really careful. And so there's this element of like, well, what you're basically saying is, can't we like care about their feelings? And it's like, we can care about people's feelings without yes-manning everything that they say about themselves, right? So when somebody says to me, I'm dear gender, my immediate response is going to be, what does that mean to you? Because it's pretty because it's meaningless to me. You're not dear gender. That's not a thing, right? That doesn't map onto anything that we understand about gender. But I would be curious what it means to you.
I think I was going to go with that.
Can I just answer one thing before you continue?
Well, before anyone goes,
Yeah.
I do have someone super chatted a question, and it relates. So someone paid me $10 to do this, so I'm going to do it. Sorry, gang. A lot of LGBT people made the same arguments that you are all making right now against trans people. Transphobia is a real concern in LGBT groups to this day. Now, trans people are doing the same to xenogender folks. There are people who just cannot understand, right? And this is my
This is
my
a dumb argument.
editorialization.
I'm sorry.
Right?
Nobody in the past made the argument that female or woman wasn't a gender. Nobody made that argument.
But they
Nobody
did
was
make a similar
disagreeing.
argument: is you cannot be that because you weren't born that, right?
That's not what we're saying. Nobody here has said that. What we've
Wait,
said
before
is
we
it
move
doesn't
on.
map onto gender. What in the past was going on is transgender were saying things like, I was born in the wrong body. I understand that I'm in a masculine body, but I have a feminine, like a feminine, basically like persona or identity within me, right? What xenogender is doing is saying, I'm mapping onto something that has nothing to do with gender. That has nothing to do with it.
Okay. I'd just like to say before we move on, no, Otherkin do not connect any. So I'm Otherkin. I've been in the community for a while. Otherkin don't connect themselves in any way, shape, or form to trans advocacy. None of them advocate for being referred to as trans by virtue of like seeing themselves as an animal. It's
Zero?
just considered a separate. No one who's taken seriously in the community. They're like weird randos that will say anything. But what I'm trying to say is most of them do not see it like in any way as like a gender thing. Most of them see it as a separate category of identity.
Based.
And if that's the case, then it doesn't take away, I think, from the argument that I'm making, which is that everyone experiences gender in their own way, and like if being, god damn it, shush, sorry, dog. If identifying as some form of otherkin isn't specifically a gendered like idea or feeling or experience for them, then they're not who we're talking about in this discussion.
So
Yeah,
I'm
so
just being clear.
when we're talking about
Sorry,
people who
the
feel
reason, sorry.
Hold
The reason I brought
on.
up Otherkin was,
Finish, Techno, quickly, please, concisely.
yeah, I'm sorry. The reason I brought up Otherkin was, like, as technology improves, we might be able to, like, transition Otherkin people to be like how they see themselves inside. So, like, it kind of fits into that whole conversation in a way. Is what I was saying.
It's a bit of the transhumanist argument, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit of the kind of techno-futurist idea of, eventually we may get to a point with our technology and our medical science that we can start making physical changes to people, depending on what they're looking for to more closely align with.
I get you.
The feelings that they have.
Well,
Go on.
So this is the issue with xenogender, right? Maybe in 40 years, we'll have really good technology and I'll be able to build fox ears on my head, right? The issue is, what is that still? Is that a gendered expression? Or am I just a person who identifies with being mischievous? Because if I'm mischievous, there isn't a gender that's associated with being mischievous. And I don't need it to be fox gender, right?
I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, it
does matter because you guys are lumping
it's all
yourselves
about how
part
we're
of trans
categorizing
advocacy.
things.
Yeah, it absolutely
How we
matters.
categorize these things. Like, okay, so to be clear, it would be super fucking crazy if a bunch of trans people started lumping themselves into black advocacy movements and like and started making the black advocacy stuff all about their stuff instead. There has to be gatekeeping in these communities, because if you don't gatekeep what groups are about what particular issue, it'll become any issue. Like, if we
Isn't
don't
that just a
gatekeep
way
what
to
is-
like silo ourselves off, though, right? And kind of say,
no.
Right, because
Well,
there's
no,
a lot
no,
of people.
every
There's a lot of
movement-
just let me
every-
finish real quick.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that say, well, as a white cis heterosexual male, you cannot talk about these issues, right? You cannot help us. You are not of us. You cannot speak for us. You cannot ally yourself with us. You are not us. Males can't be feminists, right? Is something we hear sometimes, right? So what you're talking about really feels like that in practice, like that you were saying, well, we have to gatekeep. We can't let everyone in this community, right? So xenogenders, right? You sit over there because you're not real and you don't matter. And you're hurting us. So, we're just going to leave you to the side while we go on with this.
Why is it?
Okay, wait. I need to finish. So to clarify, my argument is when we make movements, when we have the trans movement, when we have the LGBT movement, all of them is in service to get a particular goal, to get some kind of legislation passed. Like feminism had a set of goals that they were trying to achieve. Now, people often disagreed upon those goals, but you had an overarching plot, an overarching narrative, people had an idea of what they were doing. But if we don't gatekeep these movements, it is impossible to hold them to their particular goal. And when it comes to trans rights, we have specific goals. We have the goal of access to trans healthcare. We have the goal of access to information about ourselves. What my concern is, the xenogender issue seems like a lot of what's called mission creep, where suddenly a movement becomes about a lot of other things that have nothing to do with the original premise of the movement. I'm not saying we should silo ourselves off. I'm not saying that cis people can't advocate for us. I'm saying that our issues cannot be that other people cannot turn all of our advocacy to be about them and then tell us that we have to advocate for their issues too. You can't tell, in a very similar sense, a Black person that they have to care about every transgender issue that is currently happening. People should not have to care inherently about people outside of their identity group. They should to some extent, but it shouldn't be some kind of requirement that trans people, as is being asked of them, care about the xenogender cause.
That just seems yeah, go ahead.
This feels very like the LGB without the T movement, right? It's this idea that, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people don't have anything in common with the trans community, and therefore they don't want the two to be linked, and often that group of people ends up being incredibly transphobic in the process of making these points. And so it feels very much like you were saying something was analogous.
Stop. You gotta let him finish.
That's a complete mischaracterization.
You gotta okay, you can reply to him, but he's gotta finish. Please be concise and calm. Be concise, and then you can reply. Okay, go ahead then.
My specific argument is mission creep. There was a goal there, in this particular case, the LGBT community has always been united. There has been a shared struggle since the very beginning, and the whole goal of the movement still had trans issues, even if it had other issues as well. I'm just saying that we shouldn't be slapping a bunch of different issues that are very, very much unrelated to the original premise of this movement onto this movement. Let them make their own movement or justify why their issue is so deeply intrinsically connected to the issue that they're advocating that they be a part of. Otherwise, why are they part of the movement?
I mean, would it be an issue if we had because I know there's a lot of talk about how to sort of focus on trans issues that are specific, that we can win on, that we can actually gain some ground on politically and legislatively and such, right? So what about so there's sort of like the overall social inclusion that goes on with the queer community, which is to sort of let everybody be a part of the whole overall big tent. The tent gets bigger and bigger. That's more the social movement. But what about saying but these are the issues that we care about. We care about getting access to the bathrooms of our gender identity, right? We care about getting access to medical care, much needed medical care. We care about getting access to the HRT and such, things that are very specific, and advocating for those in a way that isn't, because we can still allow people, like you can say you're queer and you can be part of the overall queer tent, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to trans issues, we're focusing on specifically trans issues that tend to be very much needed by the binary trans people
That's a
who are
question.
transitioning from gender to gender.
That's a question I'd like clarification on. Tama, you said earlier that you don't think that xenogenders should be grouped in with the trans community, but are you fine with them being grouped into the larger queer community?
I've thought about this. I'm kind of iffy either way, but I usually lean towards probably.
Okay, fair enough.
I want to quickly just address a point that I keep hearing brought up, which is that the xenogender community doesn't have, or maybe I'm misunderstanding this point, but it sounds like you're saying the xenogender community doesn't really have any shared struggle or shared goals with the trans community. And to me, and you've been saying that the trans community has very specific goals and always has. Among those goals has been the ideas of public acceptance and, not being ostracized for one's particular
why don't
gender
xenogenders
expression.
just join Black Lives Matter? They're also really concerned about not being
Yeah.
ostracized by the public. Why don't they just join Black Lives Matter?
I
That's
think
the problem. There has to be gatekeeping.
That's
To the rest of the trans community.
Wait. Can I just hear your response? Why wouldn't we let xenogenders join BLM? If the shared goal that you're concerned about is visibility, acceptance, and normalization, and like basically defeating like implicit biases people have towards like an oppressed group, why not join BLM?
this is a reductio ad absurdum.
Just real
because
quick, Techno, we gotta let him respond. Please go ahead.
The whole thing about xenogender is they do feel it is at least in some way related to their experience of gender.
Oh, but why not race?
This idea of lumping it in with a racial movement makes no sense. Whereas
why do they feel it's gender?
Wait. Can I
That's a really good question.
You can't. Hey, we gotta go one at a time. Let's stop. Please stop.
I'll be
Okay.
quiet.
Erudite, continue your line of questioning. We can let other people in once this is done. I promise you.
Ancom,
Go ahead.
Yeah.
just want to ask, why gender and not race? What's different about these constructs that they feel like it's much more mapping onto gender than it is onto race? What's different?
Right, predominantly I would go with skin color, given race has a very outwardly visible signifier in that skin color is usually the first thing that people notice and associate with
Does not
race.
gender have the same thing? Is not gender
It has
performance?
a similar thing.
Right?
It has a
very much
similar thing in
performative.
that there is an appearance factor, but
Yes.
it is a different set of qualities, and there are different expectations that society tends to have based on those qualities as opposed to the quality of skin color. And obviously there are intersections between these two and beyond.
Yeah.
But
So if I could narrow this in, what does fox gender have anything to do with gender? What's the same there? Why is it mapping onto
the
gender?
word gender is in that.
That's a terrible
thing you were
reason.
saying.
I could just say
as
fox
someone
You
who's
race.
not-
you could say white gender then, right? It doesn't
As-
matter.
I say black
as
gender.
someone who
You could say
doesn't
black gender,
identify
yeah.
as fox gender, I can't
So what we're
give that
doing is entertaining the
explanation.
premise that it could be the same, but we're not necessarily accepting, even though we're using the term fox gender, that fox actually is a gender. We're just trying to use the terms that are being used.
I mean, you could technically apply the word gender to anything and say it's a xenogender. So, like, why does this make this more in line with gender than race? If you could still say that you're black gender or white gender or Latin gender, right? How do you decide that this suddenly becomes a trans issue specifically because it has to do with gender when you can technically say gender is anything?
So
Well, they have pronouns.
So let me ask this.
Well, pronouns are separate entirely from gender identity. Now, you can have pronouns that have nothing to do with you having
Do
a.
black people have specific pronouns?
No, but they do
You
have
could-
specific, they actually do have cultural language as well. For example, like nobody would be fine with me saying the N-word on this panel, but I bet you if I was black, you'd be fine with it, right?
Well, those are my pronouns, so you better respect them, okay?
Let me ask this. So can we all agree on? I know it's a very simplistic definition, right? But can we all agree that gender is at least in part a performance? Like your gender expression is something you express through both behavior, presentation, etc.
Yeah.
So given that, if someone were to make the performance of being a dog, puppy gendered, right? So they do up as best they can, right? They make themselves look like a puppy. I don't know if you've seen the guy who bought a whole ass dog outfit, right, and wears it around. And given that he has, or they have made efforts to pass, right, as this gender, to perform as this gender.
He's not passing as a gender. They would
Why not?
He's like, oh, it's a man in a dog suit.
What makes
right?
it different? What makes it different?
The point of this is...
Please, hold on.
Go ahead.
What they would see is a man in a dog suit, and they would think a number of things, but they wouldn't map on and go, oh, that's dog gender, and have that be meaningful.
How is that different? How is that different from someone saying, well, I don't see a transgender woman, I see a man in a dress?
Okay, so it's really different because in the case of a man in a dress, when you look at a man in a dress, you can tell that he's in every way trying to perform like a woman. He's probably wearing makeup, he's wearing gendered clothing, right? He's probably also changing his behavior and ideally his tone of voice to try to mimic these gendered things. Whereas dog gender isn't a gender, so you're not really mapping onto any performance. People just think you're a dude in a dog suit. They don't even think you're a dog. They're not like, is that a dog? They're like, it's a dude in a dog suit, right? So like it's similar, but the issue is there isn't a performance of dog gender. There is a performance of femininity, right? There is these performative gendered pieces to it.
I have a question. Like, why isn't there?
Just real quick, I wanted to get Aaron a chance. Aaron doesn't have a cam, so it's harder for them to jump in.
Yeah,
but Aaron, if you had something to
that.
say, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump back a little bit to like Erudite said something about putting fox ears on and performing as fox gender and stuff like that. Take a look at like the body modification community and see some of the like extreme body modification things that they do to themselves to make their identity kind of show through their body. Someone who has like implanted horns in their head and says that their demon gender is actually performing as that role, right?
What
So
role?
would you
What is
say-
demon gender? Can you tell me what that means?
I don't know because I'm not
Can
demon
I-
gender. But
That's
it's
just
just
the
an
point.
example.
If I told you what is a woman, you could probably tell me a couple things. Well, she's probably more oriented towards help fields. She probably looks feminine. She's more likely has hair. She probably wears girly clothes. Probably wears makeup as well, right? Like there's a bunch of these things that we would map on. She probably occupies a little bit more of a submissive role in a lot of relationships, right? There'd be a number of things that you would map onto what that means. But if I say what's demon gender, and you go, well, I don't know, and it's like, well, so now you're just saying this is
that
private
all
language.
of these things that we assign to the role of woman are arbitrary. They are things that have
They're not
been
arbitrary.
They're not
arbitrary.
absolutely
They're not arbitrary.
100%
Gender is a
No,
performance, but it is absolutely downstream of biology. You can't escape that. The universalism of gender, even though there are sometimes 3 genders and sometimes up to 4 genders in culture, we have a very, very universal schism of femme and masc universally in all cultures. It is necessarily downstream of biology. It's not wholly biology, which is why I wouldn't say XX means you're a woman necessarily, right? But it is absolutely downstream of it. You cannot escape.
We are having an evolution in culture and society that is changing things. So what it means to be just real quick, and I will let you go exactly next. I promise you, Flora.
Right. Okay.
But as we expand our ideas of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a human, right? Like, it is not out of the realm of possibility to me that we can expand this. So even though I cannot tell you specifically today what it means to be demon gender, that there will not come a time, or there should not come a time, then I can say, well, people identify as a xenogender, a demon gender, because of X, Y, and Z. I think that we are appealing to tradition in the past in a way that does not map on to what we see today. Go ahead, Flora, and then Erudite can respond.
Okay.
I somewhat agree with your point. This is what I would say. So to be clear, what we're all trying to say here is gender is a social performance. If you as someone who has read Hamlet went to see Hamlet, and the person who was playing Hamlet was playing some ultra feminine person whose lines were completely different, it would, in many ways, be unrecognizable that they're trying to perform the role of Hamlet. There is a role that is more than just arbitrary. There's a social acknowledgement to some extent of what it means to be Hamlet. There's a social
there's a social acknowledgement of demons.
Well, wait, can I? Yeah, I'm getting there. I
please.
swear I'm getting there. So there's a social acknowledgement of what exists as a woman, what exists as a man, and people are trying to map onto that. Unfortunately, though, we don't have a social role in the same sense for what constitutes a demon. Now, if we started having these social roles as well, I would more understand, especially if especially if we understand this even only half as well as like man gender and female gender. Then it would be trans. But because these social roles don't necessarily exist yet, we are skipping a very fundamental step in the development. But in the future, where that actually happens, yes, absolutely, xenogender people would be valid, although we just call them regular genders at that point.
Go ahead, Ancom.
Yeah. So you're putting the cart before the horse. You're saying that we need to have a role for these people to fit into before they're allowed to identify as this thing. And that's never how society is developed. It always comes from people start breaking away from the societal norms, and then society adapts to those norms as the movement grows, and those roles become organically created within that society. And the point that I was making about even the genders of man and woman, the attributes we ascribe to them being arbitrary, is while yes, there is definitely something downstream biologically, because every society does have some role for man, for woman, for a few other genders. In the case of, I think, ancient Hebrew, they're up to 6. But anyways, the point is they're not always the same. There's been a massive diversity over the entire history of humanity about what roles are ascribed to what genders, what attributes. Color, for instance. Today we ascribe blue to boys, pink to girls. 100 years ago, or 120 now, that was flipped. The idea that women wear high heels, 200 years ago, that was men. Same thing with long, flamboyant, fancy clothing. We tend to ascribe that to women now. A man wears a very, trim, nice suit, whereas a woman can, have.
Got you.
We generally allow more creativity.
Okay, sure. The issue is that in almost every single culture, for example, hard physical labor was always associated with masculinity, because testosterone helps you do hard physical labor because it makes you physically stronger than women. Also, child rearing was almost always associated with femininity because of limitations like breastfeeding and childbearing were associated with this. This is why these genders universally emerged across the board, is because there are some biological touches. So I would never argue that pink is biologically connected to women. I'm not some cringe conservative like that, and high heels or anything like that. To act like all of gender is just this arbitrary manifestation is a problem, because then what are you telling trans people? Are you just telling trans people that their gender dysphoria is just an arbitrary creation, that if they could just get their minds around the fact that gender is just made up, they wouldn't feel dysphoria? Why do they even have dysphoria then?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Well, before we go too far, people
Okay.
have given me money to ask you guys things, so I'm gonna
Okay.
do that. Right,
All
$20
right.
from James Castile. Okay, to ask you, what do the panelists think about the theory that the recent trans/xenogender explosion is considered by some to be indicative of a social contagion and not reflective of people's mental state, i.e., the same as the anorexia epidemic of the 90s? So I believe you touched on this earlier. Tama, you said that xenogender is a social contagion. Do you extend that to other things, such as the trans movement, or is it specific?
No,
to
I could name. So xenogender is a social contagion. What happened was, normally we make words that are trying to actually map onto something that existed. The person who tried to make the term xenogender, they were just thinking up words. Now, to be clear, it's in this whole blog post. This is the originator of the term. This is the person who invented it. They were trying to
Baphomet,
make up words that
June 26,
sounded
2014.
really. Yeah, they were trying to make words that sounded really cool, and then they would make definitions attached to the words. That's what this was. And when we're talking about a social contagion, it is something that did not exist until someone made the idea and then propagated it into other people. People who have never heard about quote unquote trans ideology can still feel gender dysphoria, but people don't experience the xenogender phenomena without being like exposed to that.
I don't know if that's
that
true.
this specifically.
I think that's
So,
unfalsifiable.
I mean, someone had to originally-
That's not
Sonia,
unfalsifiable.
Sonia can go next, but before that, I don't think that's unfalsifiable, right? You cannot
it's
tell
not. No,
you
stop.
cannot
It's not
tell someone.
unfalsifiable.
So,
You cannot tell
So,
someone in
here's-
how do you fall? Well, let me ask you then,
How
because
do you
you're
falsify
challenging.
transgenderism? It's
How
the
do you-
same question.
No, how do you falsify how I feel? If I say I feel sad today, can you falsify that?
Well, sometimes yes, but when we're talking about xenogender experience, yes, there's a way to falsify about whether or not it's like some biologically inherited thing. Because what we're talking about with trans people is there's probably some level of biological thing that is going on that is creating this phenomenon. And what Tama, I believe, is saying, I don't want to put words in Tama's mouth, she's saying, where's the mapping on into anything material or physical for where xenogenders came
I'm
from?
not asking-
It seems to just pop up as a cultural
I'm not
phenomenon,
asking you
like
to
being punk.
falsify it in terms of biology. What I'm saying is that this I understand where you're coming from, that currently gender is downstream of biology. What I am arguing is that I don't think it must be so, right? It is so, but should it be so is the question. And I would say not necessarily. I do not think I cannot think of any in the modern world we live in today, many good reasons for it to be so. And given that we can disconnect these things, why should not we disconnect these things, right?
Can we?
Wait, I think
Because
Zonia wanted to go
universally,
a minute
we've been
ago.
unsuccessful
we'll
at
get there.
disentangling the two things, right? Sex and gender have always been connected universally. Every single culture seems to have both sexual and gendered expressions that are decently consistent across the board. They're not always the same, which is why gender and sex are different constructs. But the idea that they're just fully dissimilar and you can just make them up as a society, it's like, great, show me evidence of a society that just came up with genders that had nothing to do with masculinity or femininity. Find me one.
Go ahead, Zonia. I'm the moderator, so I can dodge these things by saying, "Oh, I'm just the moderator." Go ahead, Zonia.
So, so on June 26, 2014, Baphomet, the Tumblr user, posted a whole bunch of different combinations of words with the suffix gender on them that they brainstormed when they were on flights on business trips, and then came up with post hoc definitions of those words. Xenogender was one of them. People seem to identify with that definition, though it was never describing an observable pattern of feelings or behaviors. It was literally just something that was a fun combination of words. They openly admitted to it. That was the original post. So since then, some people have utilized that word to give name and sort of make more official or codify their own personal expression. So it's not necessarily that these expressions don't truly exist or are not true feelings that some people have. It's more that they have taken that word to describe it. But what I would argue is that the explosion of xenogender identity that took place mostly online, almost exclusively online, on Twitter in particular, and then also more recently on TikTok, is absolutely a social contagion. And yes, I would also say there's quite a bit of social contagion also causing people to want to be transgender as well. So I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think that's something we see in everything. I think people are kind of get a little bit lost. They want to feel a little bit unique. They want to be different. They don't want to be just kind of the run of the mill and the norm and average. And so they come up with an identity that people will accept and that people won't question. And that makes them feel special. It makes them feel different. And it makes them feel part of this group that is also focused on and seen as being special and different. And so, yeah, I don't think that's a controversial thing to state. Yes, there is social contagion that is, I would argue, is making xenogenders very, very popular. And also, a lot of trans people are swinging to the identity of trans because of social contagion. Yes.
Okay, I think there's something that's
Go
not
ahead.
quite being included in this description, which is the social contagion theory seems to leave out the fact that for a lot of people, the fact that something is becoming more popular, more mainstream, more well-known, gives them permission to be open about the ways that they feel. So there was a reason that as more gay people began to appear in media and on the news, you saw something of an upsurge of people coming out as gay. Same thing with the trans community. I'm
think we all
arguing
acknowledge
that
this.
because clearly someone had a feeling of of this idea of being otherkin. I sorry, I forgot the details of the Baphomet posting from 2014. You were saying
Xenogender.
yeah, clearly someone was feeling a certain way about their identity, and they decided to put a word to it. And yes, I'm not dismissing that there are people who just kind of like to jump on the bandwagon and feel special, but I don't think that is the entirety of the situation. And I think there are a lot of people who had similar feelings and are able to now find the words that help them describe those feelings.
So
Whether or
I think
not,
I think it can't be both at the same time, right?
yeah.
So you can have some
think
who are
it
saying, "Oh, look, there's more freedom to actually I can open up and be honest about this or explore it," and then you can also have people who will jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
I
true.
think
With
clearly both is
go
the
ahead,
case.
Techno. I want to give you a space, but then I have someone pay me money to ask another question. So go ahead, Techno, and then I'll ask the question. So.
Yeah, I was just saying I think it's both social contagion and also more openness. So yeah.
Okay, no, it can be both, definitely. So 𝕵𝖎𝖎, $5 says, if we see xenogender as drag rather than trans, would that be acceptable to not so erudite? And should xenogender be accepted in the same way that drag is?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I was reading.
Sure.
difficult.
If we see xenogender performance as drag rather than trans, so if we put it under the umbrella of drag, right? Would that be acceptable to not so erudite? And should let me finish reading this. And should xenogender be accepted the same as drag?
I don't think drag people are trans people.
Sure, and that's just why
Have you seen that?
I don't include them on. I'm very for gatekeeping labels. Okay, I think gatekeeping's fucking based. Okay, absolutely. Drag queen is part of the LGBT queer expression and community. It's actually an integral historical part of it, right? Going back all the way to was it stonewalling in Paris and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that I think drag queens themselves are transgender. Some are. Most of them are oftentimes men, and oftentimes are gay men specifically. So drag is not the same as trans at all, because they're not actively trying to transition, particularly because yes, they are performing for a small duration of time.
But the question,
most drag queens don't walk around all the time in their drag. That's kind of the point
that
of
wasn't
drag.
the question.
yeah, well, no, just real quick, Income. So the problem, as Tama said, was that lumping, sorry, words today hard. Lumping xenogenders as a trans is doing harm to the trans community. You also mentioned that you think that lumping xenogenders under the trans umbrella does harm to trans advocacy. That's something you said. So the question was, would it be more comfortable for you? Would you be more accepting of it if you lumped it under the drag community instead, recognizing that they are two separate things, and drag should be treated differently than trans community is. And so if we are to
why are we lumping it? Just let it be its own. Just let it be its own thing.
Let it be an X.
Why does xenogender now need to be? Just be xenogender. Just do your own shit.
Well, should it be accepted in the same way the drag community
This is a metaphor.
Right? That's the question.
What they're basically saying is, what if this was the same sort of thing as that?
I understand what they're asking. I just don't care. I don't care. I don't think xenogender needs to be lumped anywhere. I'm not interested in it. Just to be clear, xenogender's not going to take off in the next 30 years. I'm sorry, it isn't going to become a major cultural phenomenon. I don't give a fuck. That doesn't mean that I'm not accepting.
You have a crystal ball?
What?
You have a crystal ball?
Tell you what, I'll bet 10 grand on it, and you can talk to me in 30 years and see if xenogender's taken off. Okay.
So let me kind of frame something up here. Like, I'm just going to speak a little bit from my experience. I don't want to drag too much of my experience into the argumentation for obvious reasons. It's not really fair to everybody on the panel. But growing up, I wasn't seeing, let's just say fox gender. I wasn't seeing a bunch of foxes engaging in activities and behaviors and such that I wanted to engage in that society wasn't allowing me to engage in, right? I wasn't being cordoned off from like playing with the foxes and their dolls, right, from society and being forced into back into being the human that I was supposed to be. That's not how most of us relate to the world around us in terms of gender, right? When I had teachers going and taking me away from the girls and saying, that's not what boys do. You're not allowed to play with these dolls. You're not allowed to just play with the girls. You got to go do the sports over here. And they were telling me to behave in these certain ways that were very much specific to genders. And that caused more and more, as I got older and my body started to change, I had more and more gender incongruence, of course, dysphoria, as we refer to it these days. That made it more and more just an internal struggle that I dealt with and something that I had to rectify and deal with, which meant transitioning, right? Which meant going and saying, no, this is who I am. I'm a woman. I express this way. I do these things. I'm more effeminate. Yes, I'm more emotional and a little bit more sensitive about certain things and more vulnerable about things and more willing to cry about things. And that's just me. That's how I am. And you trying to force me back into this mold that society says is the way that I should behave because I'm a boy is incorrect. And so that's what my transgender is. It's not about some like association. I saw the foxes playing with the dolls, right? And that kind of thing. These things don't actually make sense from a societal perspective. And that's how we understand gender and how we also understand transitioning and transgender. So these things are tied to actual societal experiences, not to something outside of societal experiences.
I've got you. Go ahead, Aaron, and then I wanna do a bit of a shift here. So go ahead, finish up, Aaron, and then we'll move to the next.
Sure. I just think there's when you talk about xenogender isn't trans, there's a lot of crossover with the trans community and the xenogender community. I don't know of a single xenogender person that's cis. All the xenogender people I know are trans and are taking part in transitioning to the opposite gender. If you could show me a cis xenogender person, I would totally drop that point. But when you say xenogender isn't trans, and a lot of like these trans xenogender people feel like you're invalidating their trans experience rather than invalidating their experience with whatever xenogender they are.
Well, then there's trans plus whatever else they got, right? So
Right.
if they're also transgender in terms of their feminine to masculine bimodal spectrum expression, then sure, that would definitely be a trans experience. I can point you to a lot of xenogender
I just found
people
on your guys'
who don't have
Xenogenders
that,
and more.
though.
Yeah. Xenogenders and more Reddit. I just looked up to see if there's anybody in there who's cisgender and xenogender. And there's like 3 people in this, like just scrolling quickly, that identify as being cis.
Like we literally had someone in my community who got into a big old fight with people, and they themselves were like, they express cis in every way. But I'm not going to say who they are. I'm not going to say what their gender identity is because it's very unique, but they were xenogender. And yeah, they were otherwise, for all intents and purposes, male and masculine presenting.
Also, my issue is
that match their assigned sex and gender at birth, by the way.
The only reason I even cared about this, I used to be of the same mind that like, who the fuck cares, is never going to take off. That was all up until I was in a trans support group, and there were, because this was like a huge like because the group had obviously a progressive leaning slant in a very conservative place, they were really afraid to turn away the people who were xenogender but like actually cis. And so to be clear, I was like I just didn't want to have anything to say. I didn't scoff, I didn't look weirdly at them whenever they would say their own thing. I just never wanted to have to like talk about it. I didn't want to have to say anything in particular, so I was just quiet during like the support group meetings whenever one of the 2 of them would speak up.
Okay.
And eventually, wait, one more bit. Eventually, the problem was I was being I got asked in this particular group to affirm them, or why I never said anything like in regards to them. It's something that I was forced to like actually have an opinion on, and I got kicked out of the support group for not wanting to lie. I said I didn't want to be a part of this.
Well, how is that different? No, stop, please. How is that different from someone saying, "Hey, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about trans issues. I really don't. I think it makes me uncomfortable when they're in my space, and I'd really rather them not be there. I would rather not have to entertain them and things like that." What is the difference here? I'm struggling to.
Well, this is
see...
a trans space, and I, as a
it's...
trans person, got kicked out because some cis people, because I didn't want to like entertain some cis people who had a xenogender.
Okay, here's the issue. If we're not mapping gender onto something that is downstream from biology to some degree, whether if there's not some material essential core to it, right, then we're just saying that gender and the expression of it is the same as any other random thing we choose to identify with, like being goth or being punk. In that way, it's just an aesthetic, right? So if you want to be the aesthetic of being a fox, that's fine. I don't really care. The issue is, for trans people, is there is something material that they're mapping onto. The issue for a lot of like the trans movement right now is it's not clear because neurological correlates are fucking messy. There isn't like locations for things like identity or like sexual orientation. They don't exist, but they're probably something related to the brain and how it's working, right? So if none of this is downstream of something essential and biological, then it's all fucking arbitrary. It means nothing, and it necessarily reduces the entire trans advocate like need of gender dysphoria into nothing. It's just you wish you could be punk, and that's not what trans people are asking for. They don't want to be punk. They want to be like, they feel dysphoria over their body.
And this is what I wanted to kind of press on this a little bit more, because like when I'm calling a senator to tell them to vote against an anti-trans bill or to vote for like a bill that is expanding trans access to healthcare or something, I can explain to them in more simpler terms something regarding, yes, you know, this is our gender experience. Some people, they're born into a body that is just not correct. It's just like many other people can have certain deformities when they're born a certain way, and there is a medical path to treatment for them to correct that. And so this is what I'm asking you to vote for or against or something like that. These are things that I can explain to them, and these are also things that have a medical diagnosis that describe that it is something necessary to treat, and that there is an actual actionable course of treatment for it. And so that creates sort of the necessity and the alarm in the average politician when you're explaining it to them, and it makes sense to them. But how do I go and explain something much more arbitrary like xenogender that doesn't have that kind of necessity, doesn't have that diagnostic criteria to it, it doesn't have a course of treatment for it, and then in addition to that, when you have a whole bunch of people who are basically saying, well, yeah, it's just, you know, these are things that I like. This is what I identify with. I identify with these creatures. I identify with these things. I identify with these characters. I've even seen people have xenogenders based off of characters in books. That seems very just topical, aesthetic kind of things that aren't actually critical and don't actually need some form of treatment or focus from legislative action. I can't explain those things. And when I get politicians pushing back and saying, well, what about all these things? Are all these other things going to be included as part of this? If we start letting you into bathrooms doing this, or we're going to start having people dressed up as horses going into bathrooms, like these things, they sound absurd to the average person. I can't defend it. I can't argue for it. I simply have to eliminate it from the thing that I will advocate for, just so that I can be effective in my advocacy.
At this point,
I think ban horse fuel from bathrooms.
So this is this is the exact problem with mission.
Well, no, I really want to move on to the next topic. I really do, because we got a limited amount of time, and we've spent an hour on this, over an hour, and we have other topics that are also interesting that are related here that I really want to get to. Let's talk about gatekeeping a little bit, right? Gatekeeping in the sense of most of us on here have acknowledged that it's important, right? To some extent, to gatekeep who is and is not allowed to be in your movement. Let's talk about how we gatekeep in regards to passing. First of all, how important is it to pass or make an effort to pass to be considered trans? Is it important at all? And if not, why not? Given that it is important to gatekeep, why are we not using passing as the metric and not other metrics? Go ahead, gang.
I think
It doesn't
passing.
matter.
I think that passing is absolutely something that we should be looking for as the goal of a person. I don't understand why anyone wants to use the trans label, but has no intention of ever passing at any point in their life for something other than how they were assigned.
Yeah, I don't think that it's something that we should be necessarily trying to penalize or gatekeep aggressively, because there are a lot of people who will transition and go through sort of a phase, or will transition late because they don't have the benefit of parents who are accepting of it, or family who are accepting of it, or don't have the access to the funds or healthcare necessary to do what they need to do to transition before their body is significantly altered by the hormones that were native to their biology. So we kind of need to allow for people to go through the awkwardness and the difficulty of trying to do the performance that they want to do, without gatekeeping them out of being trans. But I think that there should be a goal to try to pass as the gender that you express.
But when it comes to access to
an individual.
Well, let's talk about that, right?
That's not
let's
what
talk...
gatekeeping is. If it's gatekeeping, we're not talking about like what you personally feel about. We're talking about like a group and a community.
So if I, for whatever reason, right, I've had gender dysphoria for a while. This is hypothetical, gang. This is not me coming out or anything, please. So I have had gender dysphoria for a while. I've really felt like a stranger in my own skin. Through the online discourse and through reading about it and through soul searching, I have discovered that I am in fact trans. I am not the gender I was assigned at birth. I am in fact the opposite gender. And I want to transition. At what point should I be given access to the things that trans individuals are given access to in forms of legislative protections, in forms of medical procedures, in forms of all these things?
Should I trans youth debate all of a sudden?
No, what I'm asking is, I guess to be a little more clear, is should we require any level of passing before we give access to trans individuals to the gender access of their choice? So I decide I'm trans. Does that make sense?
Have that?
Like,
we used to have that as a requirement.
Well, isn't passing more the goal than it is like the requirement, right? Like if somebody doesn't pass, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't call them trans, because if they're not passing, like say it's just like an individual who unfortunately like has like very, very hyper masculine features and doesn't pass very well, but they're like clearly making an attempt, right? Even though they like, we might say like they don't,
but they're making an attempt.
Yes.
That's the thing.
We call it social transition. We call it social transition, right? So there used to be more gatekeeping in medical around this, where you socially transition for a certain period of time, and then you would be given access to the medical care necessary to go through the physical transition. Those requirements have been decreased over the years. Now there's more of a gender affirming approach here in the U.S., but more like an immediate gender affirming approach.
Is that good or bad?
That one's hard to say. There's a lot of like in the data in that there's a lot of things to suggest that maybe it is bad, because there are a lot of people who are going down the route of starting to take like HRT and such, and then later on finding out that wasn't for them, or dealing with more depression and more suicidal ideation later on. And so that's part of the reason why Sweden rolled back its gender affirming model particularly for kids, because they're finding that suicide rates were not decreasing, depression wasn't decreasing, and in some cases it was increasing. And so in the US, we're not really certain where we're going with that, but like, do I think that people should pass? My answer would be no, because that's too high of a bar for a lot of people. I think we should allow for people to try to do what they can. But I think that it should be a goal to socially transition and try to get in that direction.
I think this is where maybe I miscommunicated, right? Maybe this is my fault. Should we require an effort to pass? Let's say that. So if I make no effort, I get what amount of effort should I have to
You look
make?
like you
Yeah,
got a
I think
beard.
that's-
You're not
What?
dropping your
Yeah.
voice. you're
What
lowering your
amount of
voice.
effort should I be required to make socially to get access to things like a woman's locker room, or to things like going to the what other gendered access to play in a woman's sport or something, right?
Let's say
Okay,
something should be a clear
definitely.
attempt, right? Like I don't think that there's like this distinct line where we can
Mm.
say like this is right where it is, because, for example, the line that I draw for trans women is clearly not going to be the line that I draw for trans men, right? Because they're trying to perform in different directions, right? But like the line should be when you look at a person and you can tell there's a directed attempt going on here to perform, and I can tell what you're trying to perform as, right? I'm going to choose the kind thing, particularly if you can tell that the way that they're dressing, whatnot, they're going out on a limb. It's probably not something that they're doing to be antisocial. It's probably something that they're doing that they realize is maybe uncomfortable, but they're choosing to do it anyways out of a serious attempt to perform as the opposite gender. I think it's completely reasonable. I mean, I hate the fact that we have gendered bathrooms just in general. I think it's fucking stupid. I don't even know why we do it. So I don't care about the bathroom shit. But yeah, I think when you look at somebody and you go, I can say that that person is attempting to perform as a woman, I think is
You may disagree with it, but
And when she says, and I want to clarify something also, because this would be something we could even talk about here, because I think it's kind of important in terms of gatekeeping. But when you say antisocial, Kyla, you mean things like not Z-cup prosthetic breasts.
Right.
Yes.
Like massive
which is
nipples.
Yes, so that's a thing that would be a thing to segue into that I think we could talk about, because I think it's an important thing to talk about.
I still not proven that person wasn't trans.
Yeah, they were a chud trying to
That's
make
the
us
point.
look
That's
bad.
what that's what Zonia's saying,
but-
like antisocial, like trans LARPing to like make digs at trans people.
So and that, but because part of where the problem runs into with this particular thing of like passing and gatekeeping is that there seems to be a lot of fear from like progressives don't want to invalidate people, they don't want to do harm if they can avoid it, right? And so there's a lot of fear around like, well, maybe this is the way this person is. I think it should have been really easy for the school board and for others to have called out that particular Ontario teacher to say, I'm sorry, your Z-cup breasts, that's not your gender identity. End of story. I don't care if it invalidates your gender identity. I don't care if it makes you feel bad. That's not a gender identity. That's inappropriate. And that's the kind of things that I think. Yeah, and I think those are the things that we should be comfortable, like we should be able to call those kinds of things out. And so when you start introducing a lot of variability into this kind of thing, it's basically saying anything can go and pretty much nobody has to pass, you start opening the door to not being able to question those things and push back on them. And then you let in those kinds of actors who are wanting to do damage or
but
express some kind of deviant behavior that could be harmful, etc.
I understand, but it becomes a question, right, for me at least, not so much of bathroom access. I thought of a better example. Women's abuse shelters, right? Should we be letting, right, because this is an issue that's up and people are questioning, at what point should trans individuals be allowed in the gendered abuse shelter of their choice? And given that almost exclusively the abuse shelters are women's abuse shelters, there's very, very few men resources here. If I identify, right, as trans, I've decided I am a woman, I just started transitioning, so my effort's very low, right? I shave, but I haven't really taken any hormones. I haven't gotten access to that. And I am in an abusive situation. Should I be allowed into a women's abuse shelter?
I think we need more research into what actually into what makes like cross-gender locker rooms and the abuse shelters more likely to be dangerous to a trans person, and then target whatever we're finding out seems to be that, because I think that you absolutely need to at some point say that trans women need to be capable of going to a women's abuse shelter and trans men need to be able to go to a men's abuse shelter. But like there's a point at which there's not much risk to them, and that's probably not the point where they need that access to that. That's what I would say. We need more data.
I think the concern that's
in the
I think the
shelter.
concern that's often brought up is more, it's, typically a transphobic argument, but the idea is that it is not necessarily the trans people who are at risk, but there is this view that trans people are the risk, right? And so I think that's where the question, at least from Wick's side, is coming from.
Well, it's about just
what
real
they're
quick.
talking, it's not inherently transphobic. What they're concerned about is like the antisocial few who are going to wear cup like breasts so that they can get access to women's spaces to prey on women, right? Those aren't trans people, just to be clear. We're not talking about trans people at that point. We're talking about antisocial men, in this case, using basically plot armor to prey on women. So I think that there's probably an overinflated concern about this. To be honest, if like a man's really antisocial wants to prey on women, it takes a lot of work to be like, so I'm going to dress and wear makeup and do all this stuff so I can get into a women's shelter so that I can have access to all these vulnerable women, right? Like, whereas like antisocial men who are like interested in preying on women have like probably a girlfriend that they're domestically like preying on instead, right? So the main thing, just to be clear, a lot of shelters will do some level of background check, and if they don't do background checks, they tend to, as somebody who's worked in a lot of homeless shelters, if it's more like an open floor, like triage center, what they always have is there are no closed spaces, there's just mats on the ground, and there's 24/7 staff available, because the reality is that women can also assault women. So when you're having like a triage center, what you're going to have is, it doesn't matter what's going on, it doesn't matter if it's a trans woman, we're going to have 24/7 staff to prevent any form of assaults occurring, because you're all usually on mats on the ground. If it's an actual like abuse center that, for example, is longer term living, they'll always do background checks. For example, as somebody who's worked with a lot of incarcerated women, it's really hard to get into domestic abuse shelters as a woman if you have assault charges in your history, right? Because they'll always do background checks on you, and if you have assault history, they won't bring you on. So this antisocial guy who's going through all of this work to be around women, to prey on women in an abuse shelter, is very likely a decently thought out predatory individual who will likely have a history of charges. So the chances of this occurring is really, 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 really small. And it still could occur, but I think the rate at which it occurs is probably smaller than the rate at which trans women being denied access to these centers is going to create like greater risk of harm. Right?
I don't know if
that's how we have to balance.
Yeah, just real quick before I lose this train of thought. That was not the main concern I had in mind when it comes to these things, because I think we all understand those are outliers, right? But what I'm talking about is women who have faced abuse at the hands of a man, who severe abuse could be triggered, right? So psychologically, by seeing someone who looks like and presents like, despite their best efforts as a man.
We don't really bring in clients based on that for the most part, right? Like,
Really?
we're not going to be thinking about, not really, right? Like, as somebody who worked in an addiction shelter, which by the way has a very high rate of domestic abuse survivors as well, right? We're not going to like be going on and thinking, what are the things that people could be coming in? For example, like we had a lesbian on site who was very, very mask presenting, was just a lesbian woman, right? But there was a couple of like clients who brought up like, hey, this kind of triggers me because of my domestic abuse stuff. And we said, like, we understand that, and there's like things we provided way extra resources, and we increased their therapy, like individual therapy time, but we didn't deny the individual services just because it triggered the PTSD.
But this is also right, because you mentioned why we don't allow, or you mentioned confusion as to why we have gendered bathrooms and things. And the argument, at least I've heard from a lot of women, right, is that they frankly feel at their most vulnerable in places like locker rooms when changing, when in bathrooms and things. And I've heard it enough to think that maybe, right, that is something that we should take into account, right, when we allow women who are abused by men into these spaces, right? Should we allow someone who looks like a man, right?
Yeah.
Even though there might not be actual danger, there might be the feeling of vulnerability is something.
Sure. I hear you. Okay, so bathrooms are going to be different. So I said I'm all for co-ed bathrooms. I don't give a fuck. I don't care if somebody's shitting beside me as a man or a woman. I'm not interested, right? Locker rooms are different because there is that like nakedness experience. What I think a lot of locker rooms do is there is like man, woman, and then usually like open, right? And a lot of times families, and most of the open locker rooms have like an increased level of like single stalls for people to change in, and then just lockers and stuff like that. And a lot of these single stalls are larger that will have like showers and stuff. Not all of them, not all facilities are perfect, right? But that would be like the ideal solution in that case, is you got like man, women, and then you've got like this neutral space that people can go into with individual lockers. For example, if you're a trans woman, but you have a penis, I think it's like, here's the thing, just Every group trying to be slightly empathetic and thoughtful of the other person is a really good idea. So if I'm in a locker room, which I have been, and a trans woman walks in, right, I'm going to go out of my way, for example, to not stare because that's rude. I'm also going to go out of my way to not like give obvious signs of fear because I'm not afraid of them for the most part, right? And it's really appreciative, for example, if the trans woman, if they still have like a penis, for example, to like be mindful and like go into an individual stall when they change like their undergarments because
They're
lots
going
of
to be
people go into
uncomfortable anyway.
what?
So
The trans woman's going to be uncomfortable anyway.
Well, of course. What I'm not talking about how she's feeling. I'm saying people be trying to be mindful and respectful of each other in different spaces.
yeah, like, and I know that this is kind of controversial because I've talked about it before, but like for me, I actually, because I transitioned late, so I'm 6'1", broad-shouldered, I have more of a masculine frame overall, right? It's difficult for me to go through the process of like fully passing. So I'm very mindful of the fact that I look large and masculine according to a lot of people, right? And so I will go out of the way to sort of be mindful of how that affects other people. If I'm in like a women's space, I notice, like I can tell when like women kind of stiffen up when they see me at first, and then they, I kind of just, I don't even know how to explain it really, but like there's ways in which that I carry myself and how I use my posture and such that are where I'm not trying to sort of, I'm being aware of how it
You give
is that
safety
my
cues.
presence can be imposing.
Yeah, you give safety cues, right? You're going to give people more space. You're
Yeah,
probably going to make sure that your energy
exactly.
isn't directed straight at
I'm
them.
not going
but
to
more to the
stand.
side.
Yeah, I'm not going to stand
Yeah.
over people, etc. Right? Yeah.
I
There's
want
that
to
sort of
I want to
mindfulness.
give Erin a chance. I think she's trying to get in here, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a good topic to discuss, the whole like self-ID and like how you present your gender and stuff like that. I'm very fortunate in that even though I transitioned late, testosterone never really had that much of an effect on my body. I didn't have a whole lot of body hair. I've got a relatively small frame, stuff like that. So I don't really have an issue with passing, so to say. I get gendered correctly and stuff like that, but I still make an effort to do the same safety cues, right? Like I'll try to like distance myself from other people and just like make people feel more comfortable around me. I don't really like, I've never been comfortable going into any kind of locker room, man or female.
True.
Like,
Yeah.
I just don't like it. It's not something that really appeals to me. But yeah, I totally agree with 𝕾𝖎 there.
Okay.
Right.
I think
I would
that
also say,
we
are we okay with the idea, for example, if I'm in a locker room and there's a guy who comes in who's claiming to be transgender, but he's ogling at all the women, right? He's like staring openly at me in my bra and underwear. I think it's completely reasonable for women to go, this is uncomfortable, and report it to staff and ask that individual to leave because they're being antisocial. And that's not inherently
Yes, but the
Right.
problem.
It's
There has to be both.
I think
if they're being very
think-
obvious about it and like blatant, like you can probably do that, and then like it can be investigated.
But there's a problem here. There's a problem here, right? Because yes, that should work, but there is in the minds of many, right, this fear of being canceled, right? And I hate to bring this up, right? But this fear of being canceled. What are people going to say when the narrative is painted that we kicked a trans woman out of a locker room, right? All the things that they may or may not have done will be called turf talking points. They'll be seen, oh, that's just conservatives making up their lies, right? Like they always do. And so I can understand that there is this hesitancy, right, for staff knowing in the age of always on 24/7, everyone's got a phone, everyone's going to clip chip you, right, put you on the internet looking like a turf, right? Like that there is a reasonable expectation that they're going to be treated, they're going to be giving a lot more leeway than someone else would. But go ahead. Go ahead.
There's a real life oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, Aaron, finish. You haven't got a lot of talking time, and then we'll go to Tama. So
Yeah, there's a real life example of that. Look at what happened with the 𝕾𝖎𝖎, if you're familiar with that, where it was kind of like a very masculine, not very passing person who claimed a trans identity, who went into a women's locker room, made some women uncomfortable. Someone recorded what was going on. Somebody, they posted on social media. It blew up into this whole fight. conservatives jumped on the train. The SPA did what they could to kind of like save face and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a real life example of that exact situation.
What was the trans woman doing in
I'm
that
next.
case?
I'm sorry?
What was the trans woman doing in that case?
𝕾𝖍𝖎? I believe
Jessica
that was
and
Eve, right?
Eve.
Yeah.
Jessica
Yeah.
and Eve.
Okay.
Yes. So okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Donna. I was just gonna say we can't litigate. So the issue is we can like keep doing these what ifs of like, well, what if somebody breaks in secretly at night and then they stick a camera in the girls' bathroom and then they start watching it. Like we can do the what ifs forever because yes, antisocial pieces of shit exist and they're really bad representations. What's important, for example, is if a person claims to be trans and is doing antisocial shit and it's pretty clear to the trans community that there's some sussy stuff going on, just be like, we don't own them. You don't have to comment on whether they're trans or not, but be like, yeah, them doing really antisocial stuff and weird stuff is bad and we disavow that. That's all you basically have to do. It's very simple.
Go ahead,
right?
Tom.
Okay. So this word's probably going to trigger a few people, but this I think that there's a bit of internalized transphobia that goes on where we assume that the people who are naturally going to be the ones that break all the social norms in these places, which is what we're really concerned with. We're concerned that it's going to be a trans person because we're used to women breaking certain social norms in like a women's locker room or men doing it in a men's locker room. And we've sort of like adjusted to that, but we're not ready to like a trans woman breaking the women's locker room norms yet. And like one of the things I think we're kind of missing is we should instead be saying, what exactly are the rules? What contributes specifically to this feeling of comfort and safety where everyone is capable of getting along in a woman's locker room? Now, to some extent, there's probably going to be some discussion of passing. You have to meet a certain criteria to be experienced as a woman, and like maybe we should try to make that a bit more lax. But in the end, there's not any one party who's going to be wholly to blame for any particular issue that goes on in society, which is the framing I don't necessarily like about some of this. In truth, it is our ability to interact with each other. It is our ability to recognize that just because you were, for instance, raped by a domestic partner does not mean that like just because they were male, a trans woman is going to perpetuate the same violence on you, or any guy for that matter. I'm not saying fuck. I worded that weird.
We get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think we get what you're saying.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, I get you. I understand. Like we shouldn't, but again, right? And this isn't just like hypotheticals or one-offs. The 𝕾𝖎𝖎 is a good example of this actually happening and occurring. And by trying to enforce like the reason we don't really mind or care or give the same attention, I should say, when a man breaks, when a cis man, I should say, breaks norms in a male locker room, it's because we kick him out. There's no problem. There's no blowback. There's no fucking media attention. We just get the rules are enforced. The problem becomes, right, when, again, as I say, we are hesitant to enforce the same rules on the trans community.
Yeah,
And
I think we need to walk away from that to some extent. I think that we do give too much protections to marginalized people to such an extent where, and I'm not saying that protections in general are bad, just too many, where we can never have a conversation about how a marginalized
What protections would you
person
take
did
away from
something
the
wrong,
trans
bad.
community?
Well, no, I'm saying that we shouldn't have such a degree of protection that any time that someone like because there is a sort of social protection where people are afraid to have the conversation about what was happening with 𝕾𝖎𝖎. Those are the protections that are excessive. When we're not able to have a conversation about what a trans person is doing to not fit in a space, we're also in part hurting them, because then when people aren't capable of expressing how they feel that person never passes, they perpetuate that not passing into a lot of their future interactions, and then are not perceived as the gender that they want to be, and that could be incredibly crushing and devastating to a person. So I'm saying that like protections where we're not willing to discuss these issues are very dangerous ones to give to any community.
Income. You
Yeah.
were trying to get
I
in
think-
here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a big part of this issue is that, we start out by recognizing that trans people are, quite frequently heavily mistreated by society at large. And so we want to afford them various protections from that mistreatment. And unfortunately, there may be some assholes, for lack of a more visceral term, who will take advantage of this. And whether they be trans or cis, whether they be performing or not, like, it doesn't change the fact that they're an asshole and the behavior that they're exhibiting is fucked up. And I think we need to come to an understanding where we can recognize when bad behavior is bad behavior, regardless of the identity of the person in question. And I think that, there are going to be people who will weaponize that person's behavior against the community as a whole. And I think we need to be better as a society about recognizing that sort of a tactic, because that's ultimately what it is. We look at the shooting in
why it's
Nashville
hard?
recently, and how many people are going off about, trans people are doing shootings. And
I'm sure.
They're a huge minority of mass shooters, but they love to use this against the trans community as a way
But
to
at the
demonize.
same time, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there is a tendency for people to valorize and just excuse the behavior. 7?
Yeah, the protest after, where people were saying there were 7 victims, right? That was super gross, right? There was a protest about the Nashville shooting where people went to like major houses of literature and said 7. And it's just like, you don't need to valorize shitty parts of your community. You just don't need to. Just because somebody is trans, it doesn't mean that we have to maximally plot armor them, right? Like, if a white woman goes and shoots up a school, just to be clear, I think she's a piece of shit. I think she's a bad person who did a wrong thing, and I don't care that we share a number of intersections, right? And I think that's the issue, right? Like, the fact that the 7 protests even occurred, obviously I'm not going to blame trans people for they're going to have every group is going to have their antisocial weirdos, so I'm not going to blame them for extreme cases. But the fact that there's so many people supporting the 7 protest was strange to me.
Well, that happened. It's not just real quick, Sonia. That's not strange, though. That I understand why it felt strange, but this happens almost every time. A marginalized person will do a bad thing, without their identity would all recognize. Terrible. But because on social media and in the news and things that they happen to also have this identity, there are a sizable minority of people who will say it's more important to protect that marginalized community than it is condemn what they have.
Those people too.
Yeah,
I mean, you're not going to get me on that one. I'm consistent. I don't give a fuck.
And this is where it's perfectly fine to call out the bad elements without calling out the entire group. So where our haters and those who would straw woman us, they'll go and they'll pick out the bad apples and they'll go and say, this we can paint the rest of the group with. But for us, we can go and we can say, no, these are bad apples. These are the problem. We don't have to go and paint broadly paint the rest of the trans community with them. So that's why this argument that, that we shouldn't, play to their narrative or something is ridiculous, because we're not the ones painting the entire group with it. We're just going and saying we should be able to stand up and say, nope, this is a bad person. This is wrong. They're not one of the victims. They are the culprit. Fuck them. That was fucked up that they did that. Right. So we should be able to do that without painting the entire group with it.
Yeah.
But we are.
I think that this kind of comes down to the idea of special treatment, and the right will so often say, trans people are asking for special treatment. And I've always kind of disavowed that entire talking point, because ultimately they're not. They're just they're asking for the same treatment. It's just it doesn't look exactly the same as you might be used to. But ultimately they're looking to be treated exactly the same as anyone else in terms of just having their identity respected the way anyone else's would be. And I think I think getting to that in both how we're treating them in the positive sense, and also how we treat them when they do bad things, having a consistent way of interacting with people regardless of their identity is a good thing, I think, and I think we need to be, better about employing that. And yeah, there's going to be a defense against the people who don't want to do that, but I think we're also seeing a reaction in the other direction where people are putting them up on a pedestal. And I think that's creating its own set of problems, and it's creating these sorts of complications.
On the same
note,
right? On the same note, right? And this is a question again. Someone gave me money. Do you think trans people are less canceled for being overtly sexual at work / in public than they should, given the amount of how prevalent sexual posting from work, hospitals, malls, from people occur on Twitter, i.e. a twincon nurse at work posting nudes from examination rooms, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So, like, well,
for
okay,
Aaron
so
first. I'll let Aaron go
first of all-
first, and then Xenia
right.
can go. Yeah.
No, I think absolutely. I think overt sexual behavior is a lot more accepted, especially within the trans community itself. A lot of times you'll find that if you stay in the community long enough, you start to see more and more and more of this, where people are just being openly sexual on their public pages and stuff like that. And personally, I find it a little gross, but to each their own, I guess. I think a lot of that has to do with like feeling like you're finally coming into your own and being comfortable with yourself.
To each their own, but do you think it's a problem in the trans community? Right? Because I've had several trans people reach out to me and we've talked, right? And that is one of the things that they will mention. They will say,
yeah,
I feel really uncomfortable in trans spaces because of how overly sexualized trans spaces are, right?
There might be something
you've heard that from me.
Well, yeah, go. Before Techno, I want to give Techno some space. They've been trying. Techno, go ahead.
Yeah. What I was gonna say was, like, when a trans person does something bad, like, they should be held accountable, but we should also like make sure that what they're accused of doing they actually did,
Sure.
kind of thing. Like be like a bit like maybe more careful than if it was a cis person.
Well, I don't know. Should we? But back to the over sexualization thing. So I know Zonia told me, but go ahead, Erudite, then Zonia. So that's the order we're gonna go in.
I think
And then
we have to look at groups that are. Sorry,
wow,
was it me or
talking over the trans person? What a trans!
I thought he had said me.
I did say Erudite, then Zonia. To be clear.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Sorry.
Right,
I'm sorry.
But it's funnier to pretend Erudite is talking over you. So, well.
I think when I think about like the sexualization that occurs within the trans community, because I think it does occur at a higher level, I don't know. It's hard for me to not see it from kind of like a psychological lens, right? It's hard for me to not look at this group that's in many ways kind of anti-institutional, anti-society, because they're this marginalized group that isn't really accepted by broad society. So there is this kind of like anti-society bend to it. And that means that it is going to pull in some individuals who are actually like more necessarily antisocial, because it is kind of like an anti-establishment, anti-broad society group, right? But also, like, when I look at a lot of trans individuals where their sex, their sexuality, their gender has always been this area of like distress and like pain, a really common expression with like sexual trauma or like any type of like these types of things is we tend to see the trauma affect people in like one of two ways, which is like hyper levels of prudishness, right? So there are a lot of trans individuals as well who would say like, I'm really spooked of sex, I'm really spooked of sexuality, I'm really spooked of my body. And we also see it expressed in like high levels of promiscuity, right? So for example, we see this in like cis women who've experienced like sexual abuse in like younger children. We tend to see these like two effects. So when I see like this hypersexuality, I don't see like a group that's just trying to like revel in their degeneracy. There's probably some that are just saying like, yeah, I love fucking doing dirty, crazy shit, right? But there's probably a lot more of just like pain and desperately seeking like validation, and sexuality is an easy, quick way to get validation.
Zonia, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, well, Kyla basically said everything I was going to say. But when it comes to like being punished more or less, I don't know. Obviously, these things are going to be picked up by libs of TikTok and stuff, and they're going to be put on blast. There is, I would say that there is
I wasn't saying
probably.
punish less. I was saying be more careful during the like.
So I would say that what I tend to see is that there's sort of a desire for a lot of the trans community to just like overlook this and see it as being kind of like just acceptable, which bothers me quite a bit because we already do have the problem of being stereotyped as being hypersexual, which isn't representative of the broader trans community. And it is used in ways that are kind of weaponized against us to sort of make us look like a bunch of deviant freaks. And it's also something that is sort of inevitably going to be like it's going to be used as sort of the straw woman for us to say, look, they're all just trying to get off. They're all trying to do this fetish thing and everything. And so, yeah, I think we should be pushing back on that and saying, what the fuck is wrong with you? Don't do that shit. Don't do it in the workplace, especially. But I would say also to keep in mind that this is the first instance I've seen of somebody like being overtly sexual at work and turning that into like content where we get to see it. So the twin con nurse is like this is sort of a new thing. Are we going to see more of that soon here? Maybe. That might be a siren call. I'm a little worried about that.
Go ahead, Tama.
Okay. I can absolutely confirm the over-sexualization that exists in the trans community. It really makes it hard for me to participate. It's a community that I've like really cared a lot about, enough so that I've engaged in activism for several years. But like more and more as the over-sexualizing of trans people becomes worse, and a lot of us are feeding into it, I find myself like unable to participate in any of the trans groups and servers that I used to, because like it's almost expected to be that as a default. And I do worry that that's becoming more of a trend. It's really fucking weird when people look at you a certain way because like you're not being overly sexual or you're uncomfortable around their sexuality, or it's so much the default that just saying that like I don't want to take certain types of pictures or see certain types of pictures is like well, do you just like hate my body or something? It's super fucking weird where we've gotten with that.
Well,
Just to
I'm
talk
just
about how I feel.
I just want to say one last thing, and then I'm going to jump out because I have to go to work. But when I
Certainly.
first joined the trans community, quote unquote, I thought my perception of it was that a lot of trans people enjoy sharing the changes that happen with their body, and
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
enjoy sharing that in a space that's safe with other trans people who are also doing the same thing. But as I was in the trans community and I saw more and more people become more openly sexual on main, I started to see it as more of a, I don't know, it's more of like a sexual thing than it is like I want to share this with my community, you know? And that really disappointed me because I really enjoyed sharing that space, but I just don't feel welcome anymore. So
Same.
Yeah,
Okay.
same.
Well, that seems to be a recurring theme I hear, right? What are the fixes for this, right?
Check out all the AGPs.
Well,
we have to fight the tumors.
Oh no.
I did it.
Have a
I
good
did
night,
it, guys.
everyone.
can anyone define that? Can anyone define that? Because people are asking. Stop! People are asking what the hell that you just said. AGP question mark.
I'll let someone else explain that.
She wants to kick out people with autogynephilia. There's a person named 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, who is a feminist who made these two typographies, I think they're called, for trans people. Either they are the homosexual transsexual or the autogynephilic. And basically the autogynephilic is a person who transitions because they feel a sexual attraction to the idea of them being either, in the autogynephilia, woman an autoandrophilia man.
It's explained as a paraphilia, basically like
Yeah.
a sexual deviance, like a kink.
Interesting. Okay.
I've heard it argued that
I
like,
recommend never looking into it if you want to keep your sanity.
You're welcome.
I've heard it argued that like some cis women who are asked similar questions that an autogonophilic might be asked, they might have similar answers.
Yeah, I actually this is an interesting story. My second
there's
girlfriend
like in terms of the sexualization, there are where women experience when they are the more they are feminized, sometimes they experience arousal from that, right? Or from men seeing them as women or seeing themselves more feminized.
Yeah, my second girlfriend was absolutely a cis woman, and I would describe her as autogonophilic. Yeah.
Really? Go ahead.
If I could give like a more serious answer of like what I think like needs to be done, I think.
Please.
So I've talked a lot with a bunch of different like trans people in my community and stuff about this issue of basically like in a community that's been so marginalized and so browbeaten and so like actually like disregarded by society, there's a really understandable reaction, which is a fear of gatekeeping, because a lot of the rhetoric used to gatekeep was weaponized against all trans people in the past, right? And there's a fear of like excluding or not being empathetic because their whole history is people being deeply unempathetic to their experiences. And so I think it's understandable that they're in this situation, but I think it leads to oftentimes this like basically an enabling behavior where nobody really wants to say no. Everyone just kind of wants to like yas queen each other. And it's very hard to be like, hold on. I'm not sure I feel about it. And I understand the process by which I think that culture has emerged in the trans community specifically. I think I do, at least in talking to lots of people. But I think it is getting to the point now where it's doing active harm because a lot of trans people, for example, have a hard time just being like, no, xenogender people are not trans. They're not part, like, they could be queer, they could be their own thing, but they're not trans. And when we're advocating for trans issues, we're not talking about you. So please don't like jump on board and like try to demand that we like talk about you, right? I think that has to happen because, as Tama said, we have to, like, I think it's really important for the community to keep focused on like what actually matters, particularly in like this current political landscape where it's like nobody cares about xenogenders. Right now, states are having a hard time making sure that medical care is accessible at all to anyone. So it's like, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I know we're running out of time. I know a few people have got to go, but one last question for you on that vein, Erudite, right? Again, that argument that when we argue for trans issues, we are advocating specifically for trans issues, not xenogenders or Black Lives Matter or these other things. This is an argument that I hear from the take the T out of the LGBT community. They say when we're arguing for lesbian or gay or bisexual issues, we're not talking about trans issues. We're talking about our own issues, and that by lumping trans in with us because of all the animosity and how the trans community is the target of the day amongst the conservatives, right? We are afraid, just real quick, we're afraid we're going to get some of our rights rolled back, right? Like to gay marriage, for example. That's something we fought for years for, or they fought for years for. Again, these are hypotheticals, gang. So yeah, I just like this kind of argumentation leads to a further segregation in my mind. Right.
I don't even know if I'm wholly like, I think if like, because sexuality is different than gender identity. So I think it's understandable for like gay individuals, like to want to be like, I don't know if we're about like like, I don't know if that's what we're advocating for. I think it's not the end of the world. The real problem is when gay people use that to just be transphobic, right? That's the actual issue.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem with like a gay man basically being like, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested in trans advocacy. Like, I don't have a problem with the people. I think they should continue to advocate. But like, no, I don't really see them as part of my community. I think that that's actually like okay. And I think like as like the queer community in general is growing, I think we're going to they're going to hit like a critical mass where like these splits are going to be like pretty natural. And I don't think like the problem is when these splits happen, we feel like so much animosity, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's just like size and mass. Like it's okay that like people with like sexual orientation questions are more interested in sexual orientation related policy. I think that's fine.
What if you're gay and trans?
Then you should probably be in both communities.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, gang, this one's been a ride. Okay. I know a few people have to go. We will open it up for a little bit, a small amount after the closing statements for call-ins. So if you have a problem with anything someone said here, or if you have a problem with what I've said, or if you just want to add your 2 cents, jump backstage in the waiting room or super chat some questions, and I'll try to ask it for those who can stay. But I do want to give a chance for everyone to shout themselves out, tell people where you can find you, and have any closing thoughts briefly. We're going to start with Ancom Psycom. Go ahead.
You can find me on Twitter at AncomPsycom. I very occasionally stream on twitch.tv/anarchistlaboratory. And yeah, I'll be around in various VCs and whatnot. So, if you want to come verbally slap me upside the head for something I said or something I should have said, feel free.
Okay, gang. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming on, and I appreciate your participation, sir. Next up, 𝕵𝖎𝖙, please.
Yeah, my name is 𝕵𝖎𝖙. You can find me everywhere under that name, except for somebody on Kick and Rumble stole my name, so I'm not 𝕵𝖎𝖙 on Kick and Rumble yet, and I'm very mad about it.
Talk to Train,
That's
get it back.
unfortunate.
I'm gonna talk to Train about Kick, but I don't know what to do about Rumble.
Yeah.
It's annoying. It's probably somebody who hates me too who took it.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Oh man, I hadn't even thought about that. Maybe I should reserve my. Oh.
I know, I fucked up.
That's what I did.
Okay,
I got
noted.
Xenia.
Noted. Okay,
Okay.
noted for
I got
later.
Xenia at Rumble.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you as always. Tama, please.
Hey, I'm Tama of the Florin System. We are Fauna and Flora TV on Twitter and Fauna and Flora on Twitch. Why do I say we? Because we're a plural system. We've been diagnosed with DID, and we'll talk about all sorts of mental health related issues. So my thoughts on this panel. I worry that we get into a place where we are saying that we need to affirm anything that a person is saying. The reason that we affirm certain experiences that people have, i.e. transness and, well, DID, because that's a thing that many people, just from looking at me, won't necessarily be capable of understanding, is because we can demonstrate ways in which society works better when we organize and categorize facts in a certain way and when we treat people a certain way. There are times, though, when we are affirming and the affirmations hurt. As has been mentioned earlier on this panel, the blind affirmations have hurt trans people when it came to Sweden, leading to them changing their blind affirmation policies. We need to be careful about what and how much we are willing to affirm, and we need to be careful about gatekeeping, which communities other people are allowed to force their issues onto. I think that anyone should have the right, though, to advocate for themselves, just not necessarily in any way imaginable. If you have any issues with me, I am a variety streamer, but in my Discord, one of us will constantly be on the voice chat, and you can bring up any disagreement. We'll have any debate almost. And if not, we'll usually be willing to schedule a time if you DM us. So I've been Tama of the Florin System, and I'll be sticking around to debate anyone who wants to come in on the after panel.
Thank you for being here. It's been a minute since we've had you on, and we appreciate you coming through this time. Gang, check them out. They're pretty cool. Yeah. And next up, we have Technopolis. Go ahead. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and I guess Discord under that name, and I'm on Reddit under the I can pull up. I can't even say that's why I kind of switched to the other name.
Got you.
Econ and Cyborg.
Well, how
but,
about you just type it in my chat so people can find you? Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for being here. Really appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Zonia, please.
Hello, everyone. I am Zonia. You know where to find me. Very easy to find on all the platforms. The only reason why I actually came here was to ogle Kyla's dog because I think her doggy is super cute. Oh,
We did that panel earlier, Zonia, a few months ago. I don't want to do that panel again. Don't make me do this panel again, Zonia. Okay.
Don't you dare sexualize my dog.
Oh, should I have brought my dog on the panel too? Would I have gotten?
No, my goodness. Look, the beautiful
German
doggy.
Shepherd with blue eyes.
That's the only reason why I'm here is just so I get to see Kyla's dog.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Okay.
I'm actually going to drop off now.
Yeah, I understand you have another panel to get to.
I have a dog there too.
Oh, see you guys. This is beautiful. See you later, Zonia. Okay, well, we got some people in the waiting room that want to come in. We got Brianna Wu and Jessica Pizzle, so we're going to bring them in and see what they have to say.
The Wooster.
The Woo.
Oh, it's the Wooster. Uh-oh.
Hello.
How are y'all doing?
Pretty good. If you got cameras, that would be ace.
Seconds. There we go. Sorry, I just got back from the Mario movie. I caught the end of the panel. How are y'all doing today?
We're doing great.
All right.
Hello to a fellow Bostonite.
Oh, are you in Boston?
Bedford, but close enough.
Oh my gosh. Are you into pinball at all?
I haven't played in a while, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah, we've got a whole arcade here at my house. It is huge. Really? It is crazy. So you're welcome over for a pinball.
We'll talk after the panel because that sounds
100%.
super fun.
No, I just I wanted to give and sorry about my voice. I'm coming off the Wisconsin election. I'm beyond tired. I'm still trying to get back on a sleep schedule. I wanted to say, Wick, I just wanted to give you a shout out today. I'm so struck by how different this conversation is than the conversation that trans Twitter tends to be happening, which is, in my estimation, tends to be very reactive. It tends to go to the most extreme place. The half an hour of this I heard was very thoughtful. It was very nuanced. And Wick, I just really wanted to give you some credit for creating that space.
That's a very low bar to be better than Twitter discourse. That's like, yes, I think that's hard not to be better than Discord. Twitter discourse.
I just want to say I'm doing way better. I'm a way more moral person than half the murderers I know.
Only half.
I didn't mean to interrupt. But finish up, Brianna. Yeah.
It's a fair point that the bar is low, but it's still really, really important. And I wanted to ask all of you a question. I think that sorry about my voice again. I think, unfortunately, trans Twitter has been put in a position of being the de facto spokesperson on trans issues, and I'm of the opinion this has been disastrous for the movement overall, right? It's where the right wing gets their ammo from. It's where Libs of TikTok gets her ammo from. So what are kind of the ways that all of us that really care about this community can use our voice and our influence and our power to kind of push things in a healthier direction? Do you think there's a role any of us need to play?
I personally have only ever really the reason that I'm probably coming off as more moderated is throughout the entire course of the activism that I've done, I have spoken to no less than 300 different trans people on their experiences, their lived experiences, their entire life. I've listened to some of the abuse that they've gone through, and it's really informed me. And I think that the only way that we're ever going to moderate some of these conversations is if we have similar bars for the people who are allowed to speak. Because if we or are allowed to be a spokesperson, not to speak in general, the people who represent us need to be people who have aggregated a lot of different opinions, a lot of diverse thought, because otherwise it sounds like you only get the most the most like hyper niche opinions from people. But I would never do like more public politics because I'm like always afraid of how that would fuck over my life.
Yeah, it will fuck over
Yeah.
your life. I can tell you that for a fact. So,
Yeah.
How do we so I understand, like, yes, that would be ideal if the people who represented different groups knew what they were talking about and had an aggregate of diverse opinions and were actually represented as a group. But enforcement becomes an issue here, right? How do we enforce that from happening? Who gets to decide who gets to be a spokesperson for a group and who doesn't? The group itself, in this case trans Twitter, at least from the outside looking in, cannot decide who should represent them or even what should be represented when it comes to them. And this is a problem. So I understand what you're saying, that yes, that would be ideal, but how do we get there? How do we get from where we are now
yeah.
to this space, right? And I wish I knew the answer because I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Right.
That's
I think
what
we
I'm
need-
seeing
I
a
think-
lot of.
Go ahead,
I
Pizzle,
think
please.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
Pizzle.
well, that was one of my biggest things. One of the things I was going to come in here to ask is how trans Twitter is very divided, very much divided. Because you got people that, I think about it this way to kind of put it in perspective. You got like the Blair Whites, and then you got like the Brianna Woos, but then you got the Doe gender people and all that. So it's all very divided. So before we even think about, kind of getting a spokesperson and, we have to find a way to get them together to agree on anything. And they don't agree on anything. And I was wondering if there was a way to get all of these trans people to just agree on something, because they don't agree on it. I mean, they don't even agree on laws most of the time.
I think it's harder than that, though,
Wait.
because if I could just say something super quickly, there's a real tendency I've noticed. So who are like the most popular or the biggest named trans people out there, right? ContraPoints has been destroyed by trans Twitter. Keffels has been destroyed by trans Twitter. It seems like every single person that rises up, I think most of us would agree, Caitlyn Jenner does not deserve to be at the Sunday cookout, right? But it feels like everyone that gets any kind of level of success, there's a real movement to tear them apart, right? And I would suggest to you, I don't think this is particularly constructive, right? I think any civil rights movement needs leaders, and I do think there's a tendency of trans Twitter to just destroy all of theirs.
Well, I'm concerned that we're not focusing on kind of the destructive nature of Twitter itself.
Sorry, I'm trying to answer this. So there's no magic button that we're ever going to be capable of pressing. But what we can do is teach people greater media literacy. It's not an immediate solution, but there's almost no immediate social solutions to any given problem. When if we are challenging the people who are making the most bombastic opinions, if we are casting aspersions on the people who don't seem to like genuinely represent a more diverse plurality of trans thought, if we're not getting people to qualify that they're capable of like understanding where other sides are coming from, then like that level of scrutiny already is going to make some of the worst actors cave. And sure, they'll still have some degree of a drama audience, but like I think that to some extent teaching greater media literacy in that sense would help improve those conversations.
Okay, there's a $10 comment from James Castile. Do you feel that some people are identifying as non-binary in order to virtue signal that they aren't privileged? It's almost a parasocial way to get away from white privilege.
Yep.
I think it does happen, but there's also some exaggeration in how much it happens. I would say.
That's the thing. A lot of it happens on, we see a lot of it happening on Twitter, but me, like IRL, I don't see, my sister-in-law is trans. She's almost fully done. She's in the process of finishing out her bottom surgery. But she's trans. She's been through it, and I've spoken to her. I've spoken to all her friends, all my sister's friends, everyone. None of them even knew what xenogenders were, and like they knew non-binary, but they don't have these kind of worries or cares that you see on trans Twitter. And so that's the thing. Like I understand it isn't as common IRL, but Twitter and social media is becoming such a powerful conduit for everyone on all sides and all places to kind of push their message. And so that's why one of my concerns was, how do we get trans Twitter together? Because them being separated doesn't help the movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge that like leftist Twitter has been facing since Twitter was a thing. Like, it's really hard to get any diverse community to, to come together around a particular set of ideas, primarily because there is a lot of diversity within that community. Now, there are, I think, definitely some common themes that run through most of it, but I do also think that Twitter as a platform has a pattern of giving an outsized voice to, minority opinions, largely because, those minority opinions, specifically the ones that are more controversial, get more engagement, specifically because they are controversial, and so they get pushed up to kind of the top of the views. The same sort of thing happens with any social media, be it TikTok, Facebook, whatever. So I think that it's something, I think Tama mentioned, the idea of media literacy, and specifically social media literacy, which I think is kind of its own thing at this point, is helpful. But
what does that mean? Okay, so no, I keep hearing this. I'm sorry to interject, but this frustrates me. Okay, because this is an answer I hear to a lot of problems. The solution to misinformation, the solution to this, media literacy. What does that mean? Who teaches it? Who gets to decide what is media literate and what is not? Like, I don't know if this is an actual answer, and I don't mean to be like pushing on you or react to this harshly, but just let me finish my rant, please. It's my goddamn show. Okay, so yeah, this kind of like almost like a magic wand, like media literacy, alakazam, boom, and suddenly everything's fixed. I don't know if that's actually a real solution. I think that's just the catchphrase that people use, and I'm sorry, like, it really frustrates me that this is something that gets just pushed all the time, and I don't think anyone even knows what it actually means. Erudite, maybe you can elucidate.
I'm willing to define what I meant by that.
Well, what if you decide? What if you go? I don't care who.
Okay,
like,
I'm gonna go. I'm confident. So here's the thing. I don't think it's media literacy. I think what it is what's happening to trans Twitter is happening to every movement's Twitter group. The issue for trans people specifically that 𝕵𝖎𝖙 outlined is that, like, those are the major spearheaders of your culture, right? So, like, feminism, if you go to feminism Twitter, it's a fucking cesspool too. Like, just to be clear, it's fucking off, right? We've got fucking 𝕵𝖎𝖙 saying crazy shit and calling herself a feminist, and then you got, like, other motherfuckers calling themselves a feminist. So, like, any advocacy group on Twitter almost like Twitter incentivizes the most antisocial, like, and I'm meaning that, like, in the way that, like the clinical terminology of that, the people who are most inclined to be low empathy, to be highly aggressive, and to say really, really spicy shit are going to rise to the top. And it's really, really easy to champion somebody when they're dunking on people that you hate. It's not so easy to champion somebody when they say really awful shit about, like, things that are very opposed to what your community is for, right? Which is why, like, the toppling up and toppling down occurs. I think as well, there's a really big issue that's occurring increasingly, I think, in our society, which is, like, bad think. Like, we taught critical thinking in school, which was garbage, right? A lot of people, for example, don't even know how to, like, take two analogies and understand if they're analogous or not. Like, they can't take two hypotheticals and connect whether or not. And I don't think that that's because we're all really stupid, because a lot of logic is, like, kind of like learning math a little bit. Like, it's a skill that you have to learn. And I think increasingly people are, like, less logical. We're not really taught it in school. So people are increasingly unthoughtful. And then we encourage people to like be unthoughtful and we like love those sick dunks, even though they're like probably not good for discourse.
Okay, some money's been given to me, so excuse me while I do this. $10. Comment from Sleepy. As someone from Worcester, Massachusetts, I feel really grossed out when trans Twitter tried to label our lesbian bar here as TERF Central because they use the term women's space, because it's not inclusive enough. £10 from Noah Brown. We'll get to that, but let me finish these. £10 from Noah Brown. Question for the panel. Do you think it's doing enough to just default to they, them when talking in groups with neopronouns, or is that disrespectful? So either one you guys want to tackle, go ahead, please.
Wait.
Factual correction. Factual correction.
It's Worcester.
Worcester. Yes. Wick.
Wait.
Wick,
Okay.
you lose total Boston cred.
I'm not
You're
from Boston.
no longer welcome in our city. It's Worcester.
You have been banned from the state of Massachusetts until you learn the pronunciation of Worcester.
To root for the Red Sox.
Is this what I get out of this topic?
You damn Yankee.
Out of this topic,
Red Sox.
for all the topics we've talked about, this is what cancels me? This is what cancels me, mispronouncing the city name of all the possibilities to get canceled about talking about trans issues?
I guess.
Okay.
It's Worcester. Just learn it, you'll be fine.
Worcester. Okay.
Worcester, Gloucester, Leicester.
Okay. Can I finally answer?
No, we've got to talk about this for another hour.
Okay. So I was really hoping that there was going to be a proposition, but what I mean by media literacy, there's no one lens. This is the opening statement, the opening premise to media literacy. There's no one lens through which you should view anything. No, nothing, not for the world, not for any social issue. There's no one lens. The goal of media literacy is to teach people different ways that they're capable of questioning the figures that they're engaging with. And there are going to be certain questions, like the one that I offered, which is very useful because you are questioning a person's ability to represent a particular group. But at the same time, that's not going to be as useful. It is not a useful form of media literacy when we're talking about something that engages more with like hard sciences, in which case you need more lenses for that. And there are going to be some lenses that are particularly bad, but the goal is to teach people as many different lenses to be critical of the information that is being put before them. And some of those lenses are going to fail those people, but hopefully if you give people more ways to analyze information and they're engaged with using some of those, hopefully they're going to come out with better opinions than if they just uncritically, unquestioningly accept everything that they hear. And all of our problems come from some degree to people being unwilling to accept that maybe issues have a lot more nuance.
I wonder if this like over nuance is also a problem. However, what I mean by that is this: if you have like 20 different lenses, and this is what I see people do all the time, they simply pick the one that best supports their argument to look through. And they're like, well, of course, this is the lens we need to look through at this, and we can ignore these other lenses because this is the lens in this particular instance. But in this other instance, where if using this lens doesn't support my argument, then we should actually use another lens because we shouldn't use the same lens for everything, and we should have multiple tools at our disposal. So I don't know if that helps the situation. I think it just makes it like a different way to get to the same result.
Okay, so
wait, go ahead.
I can respond to this. So one person decides that they're going to use specific lenses that back up their claims, and that's always going to happen. But again, what one person thinks is not important. What the majority, the plurality of people think is actually what's important. And if we have more people who are engaged, having tools to assess what that means and to break that down, then hopefully through this sort of public debate sphere where people are analyzing things in different ways and then competing in the grand sport of debate with one another, hopefully through that process, good ideas win out. Because otherwise, this whole concept of debate, the idea of like free speech, everything breaks down if we can't, to some extent, trust that people are going to be capable of if being handed these tools of like assessing and finding truth eventually.
Okay.
Not everyone has to get to the right answer.
I hear you on that. I really do. I would say, from my point of view, I would call this a boil the ocean solution, in the sense that, look, I'm agreeing with you. In Dream World, makes perfect sense. I completely agree. But how do you get there? First, you've got to go write an appropriations bill to basically mandate this in schools for an entire generation. You've got to fund it. You've got to write the curriculum. You've got to, I assume if you're talking about doing it federally, you've got to mandate that it's in every single class in the United States. If not that, you've got to come up with the NEA strategy to incentivize 50 different school districts, 50 different states to require this in the classroom. And then you got to wait 20 years, hopefully, for this plan to go through if another subsequent political party doesn't sabotage it. Hold on. It's a great idea. I don't disagree, but I think it's just, from my point of view, I think it's just a little bit too idealistic. I think the real problem here is what Kyla said. Basically, social media, we have study after study that shows how much more reactive it's making all of us. And the real problem for trans Twitter is the fact that it's basically the face of this group. So I think it would be far smarter for trans people to start thinking about building something that would be like the NAACP, but for trans people, something that's out there, putting together a professional message, talking to Fox, putting out talking points, deciding a strategy, raising money, pushing legislation. I really think it's past time for that kind of professional political organization to exist.
I want to... Yeah, go ahead, Joe. I was just about to toss it to you, actually. I was like, I wanted to give Joe some space because he's just got here. So, great minds. Go ahead, Joe.
I disagree with you a little bit on the descent. It was a little turbulent, but I get you on the landing. I think something that's very attractive, and I talked about this before in spaces outside of this, where we're very attractive with the idea of activism and not really attracted to the idea of organizing. Yep. And the way that I define it, to be just so we're on the same page here, is I just define activism as speaking truth to power, and then organizing as broadening one's capacity to govern. And there's a bunch of activities that can be like broadening one's capacity to govern, like direct action, voting, direct initiatives, and advocating for direct initiatives. I think something that activists, and one of the functions that activists have, is that they have to run defense for all the organizers. They have to run defense and offense for the workers. When in reality, we spend a lot of time looking at the giant breaking down the buildings and thinking that's the only work that needs to be done, when there's also a bunch of people who are on the ground level who need to also be working at the same time. And there's ways that we can kind of do both at the same time, but it's hard. It's hard work. And an example I give time and time again of a group that is that should be on everyone's attention is Moms for Liberty, because not only do they have people in the activism route speaking truth to power and what they believe, doesn't matter if it's true or not, that's the part of the activism, speaking their truth to power, and then organizing, getting people in school boards, getting people in mayoral positions that they advocate for, governor seats.
Could you clarify what that organization is?
Moms for Liberty. It's the largest women's organization currently on the right, a close tie to Concerned Women for America.
Okay.
That's something I've also noticed, is the right has a lot of organizations that are out there, whereas the left is you have some organizations for the left, but they're all split, whereas the right seems to come together a lot more on their agreements and supporting each other. I just thought,
is that true though? When we look on Twitter, right, I think it's easy, almost trivial, right, to find instances where the right is kind of fighting itself. When it comes to Trump versus DeSantis, on pieces of theory, on libertarian spaces or right-wing spaces and things like that, it's trivially easy to find them. But when it comes, right, for whatever reason, it doesn't really translate to their groundwork as much. It does to a little bit. So what I mean by that is, even though they'll fight like cats and dogs on Twitter, when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to get on the ground and engage in their advocacy, they generally support each other. At least that's my observation. But on the left, I observe the the fights on Twitter are the same. They happen, but then it also translates to the actual organization on the ground. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases. It's my personal observation here. So,
I think that
I have a couple hypotheses as to why this is, having been involved in both, the kind of left-wing divisions, both kind of in the online spaces and in the real-life spaces. One of the hypotheses I have is just that there is a certain element to the right, which is kind of the evangelical, or just generally the Christian right, which is probably among, if not the largest segment of the right wing. Yeah. And one of the advantages I think they have, at least for on the ground unity, is the fact that they all go to church. They have this very regular schedule with which they all get together and they all talk about these ideas, and use that as kind of place an opportunity to organize. And then they have these networks of churches that kind of all get together and get into these things. And I don't think that there is anything that is quite as analogous on the left in terms of like in-person organizing.
Maybe bring back unions.
Was that?
I don't think unions are the be-all end-all to that, though. But maybe, like, you know, what you mean by that?
I think that unions, when they were more popular, definitely had a position in that. But I also think that there were and are a lot of unions who kind of eschew the farther left people in the movement, right? There was the whole thing about the AFL-CIO back in the 60s or 70s, essentially disavowing all of communism, and so that created a bit of a schism on the left that I don't think is really resolved. And so the other thing I think that there is
wait. Generally speaking, stop, please, Ancom. Let's address that. You. Okay. You're saying a lot of things, so let's take them.
Yes,
right?
I have to drop. So
always a pleasure,
everyone. It's been wonderful.
We'll see you guys later.
I see comes through on though.
I understand.
I was kind of interested in cooking.
But to question you, do you think that given the political climate at the time, right, with communism being a something that just wasn't politically viable or acceptable,
actively targeted as an obstruct as a there's a lot to that.
There's a lot to that, right? There is, but given the fact that unions, in order to survive, right, needed to disavow communism, do you think that was still a wrong move? Should they have held their ground?
I think it was a politically pragmatic move. Being a communist myself, I don't necessarily like that they did the move, but I understand why they did it. I don't want to say it was necessarily the right move or not in that particular situation. I think they made the move that they thought was most politically pragmatic at the time, and I didn't really like them, or I don't really like that they did the move. I wasn't alive then, obviously, but it's something where I think. Yeah, but I think that kind of opened the door to the, like you were saying that, they had to disavow communism because that was going to, bring them down, but they have kind of already fallen in a lot of ways, even without that element. So I kind of question whether or not that was ultimately the actually, pragmatic move that they thought it was at the time.
Well, Kami, I think what you're knocking to is that, like, just because somebody doesn't support a particular group doesn't necessarily mean that they are against that group in wholesale. Where, like, you can have a situation where you have to disavow a group of individuals as a means to just pragmatically for your survival. We can look at this to Black liberation movements when it came to groups like the Weather Report and stuff like that. Lord Underground, excuse me. Where it's like, do we want all these white anarchists who unironically want to destroy government buildings when we know that the totality of that action is going to lead to Black people dying? Like, do we want to align ourselves with groups that are going to be actively like, and then like obviously people like Hampton, Seal, and others made the determination like, no, we don't fuck with anarchists. Like, and and Bobby Seale made it clear. It's like, I support what they do. I support like what they're going to do, but they have to do that separate from what we're doing because we're doing something totally different.
Yeah, I think the schism between the socialist communist movement and the union labor movement in the U.S. was a little bit different in form and function than what you're talking about, and I think there wasn't as much of that kind of outright verbal support that was I like what they're doing, but I don't want to associate with
before
them.
we go too far down this rabbit hole, before we go too far off field, I want to bring it back to the question 𝕵𝖎𝖎 asked.
Yeah.
Right?
I didn't mean to bring it down this track.
No, you're fine. No need to apologize. Should trans activists disavow trans Twitter? That's the question, right? Should trans activists disavow trans Twitter for survival at this point?
I disagree with the premise that like I disagree with the premise. I think that we have to recognize that, you know, like where do you want to be and what you want to do. Like there are people who are going to be on Twitter and just doing the Twitter thing, but that this presupposes that trans Twitter is so monolithic that we can clearly identify it as like a clear distinct entity with a clear end game, and that's not true for any group on Twitter.
I don't know. Trans Twitter identifies as a problem. Okay, that's how it identifies to me, is a problem for trans activists.
I can put a group and say Twitter after and say the same thing. It doesn't mean it's reality.
Erudite.
The question I have is then with that is, okay, if we believe that trans Twitter is a phenomenon that is so clearly defined that we can say it's monolithic. What are the settled habits of thought and action? How do they move? How do they navigate? And how is that in contradiction or a threat to trans advocacy broadly? That would be my question.
We might have some answers for that, but I want to give Erudite a space to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna go in a different direction, so maybe I'm not sure.
Okay, before we get to you, then I want to give 𝕵𝖎𝖎 a chance to answer that question directly if she wants.
Can you rephrase the question? I'll answer it very quickly.
Sure. To be as direct as I can, do you believe that it's going to be step by step? I'm so sorry. Do you believe that trans Twitter is an identifiable phenomenon as it currently is?
Yes.
Okay, good. So within that identifiable phenomena, what do they advocate for within trans Twitter? What is their shared habits of thought and action?
I think it's almost a kind of group therapy involving a bunch of trauma dumping and well-meaning activism, right? Like it's people. It's almost like everyone's so traumatized and looking for support, and they're going to Twitter to say, "Look, this is my worldview. I want some respect. Please give it to me. This is how I would like you to treat me." Right? Like it's trauma bonding in a way.
Sure. And then what is your concern within that action as it currently presents itself?
So it's going to be repeating myself, but I think that because HRC has historically excluded trans people from their legislative efforts, you can actually look at the ACA and see how they threw trans people under the bus. This has been a pattern over and over and over again with legislation. HRC is not going to be the savior for trans people. They will nibble around the edges, but there's no true 50-state organization pushing for trans rights. So because of this, trans Twitter is really the public spokesperson for trans people. And I think because it's a group that is really involved in trauma bonding, I think they don't have the message discipline to prioritize mission objectives. I think it tends to be more like, this is the world I want to move towards. Please give this to me. And if you don't believe in this ideal, you're problematic.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is there wasn't, I'm going to totally dilute this. I'm not diluting it for the sake of for the sake of the conversation. So there was an organization that was basically heralding the sword and shield in the fight and saying, we are the ones that you should rally behind. However, for a bunch of reasons that we don't have to get into, that sword and shield and that fighting is insufficient. So much so that you have people that are just on the other side of this saying, look, we don't want to be with this group and we have nowhere else to go, essentially. Is that a fair
No, I don't think
oversimplification?
that's it. I think
Sure.
HRC is I think you have a lot of patchwork groups for trans rights. They're doing great work. I don't want to like belittle them. Like
Yeah.
Lambda Legal does amazing work on a lot of these crazy legislation. ACLU is actually pretty aggressive with doing legislative fights.
Right.
I think when it comes to lobbying and trying to like push legislation to say, make sure trans children have access to public school. There's no national organization pushing that. You know, like vetting candidates, donating money, running ads, you know, back channeling support, all those kinds of things.
I understand. And yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. And then like something with that, and I guess the problem, because like we see this in Black movements currently, is that like for Black people, we don't have control over our political voice at all.
Sure.
And like whoever has the most money and influence is going to determine the rhetoric, the narrative, and all of these things. And if I believe that can happen to Black liberation movements, that can definitely happen for trans people and just trans advocates broadly. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Okay. I wanted to maybe redirect it a little bit. So Erudite, you had a question that might redirect it, and we can get to that, and then we can just kind of wrap this up because we are running low on time on my end. But go ahead, ask your question. I'm curious.
I'm gonna fail you here. I completely.
Oh no! We did.
Hold on. I was listening very intently to the engagement because I was curious what Brianna and Joe were talking about, and I honestly completely forgot where I was gonna go.
Income. Go ahead then.
There was one of your super chats that I don't think we've addressed at all. It was the question about using they them pronouns in situations where like you don't necessarily know what people's pronouns are. From my experience in like. A good chunk of my friends are non-binary and use they them pronouns, including my spouse. So my kind of experience with this has been that like as the as an idea of like a default, if you don't know someone's gender and like if it's not extremely obvious in some way or another, they them is perfectly fine as like a default. And then I think most people will either be cool with it or they will generally politely correct you. I think the stereotype of like people getting super aggro at you for getting their pronouns wrong is kind of a right-wing myth. I think most people who use pronouns that people may not get correctly right away are perfectly fine correcting you. It's the people who are assholes who get told and then like just disregard it that they're really pissed off at.
Something within my DEI education was just asking. And that's just been the thing. Like, don't defaulting to they, them, because that kind of falls into the I don't know or I don't care. So, and both of those things can function the same way in a conversation. I'm speaking exclusively in an educational context, and this is where my approach comes from. So it's just like asking of like, hey, like, and using that as like the jump off point.
In situations where you can't ask the person because you're not talking to them, you're just like referring to an individual maybe on a panel, or like you're not communicating with them. They're a video of a person, right? I think it's completely reasonable that if you're like, I can't tell what this performance is, I think they them is like a super safe, respectful bet. It's kind of like leaving it ambiguated and then correcting.
You can weaponize.
Their name works too.
Yeah, you can weaponize like
we already use that sort of they them thing in less formal context. You work at a cafe, someone left a backpack, you're like, oh, someone left their backpack, because like that's just going to be the automatic thing that we do. That's the cultural automatic thing. And so that's what people already do all the time. So it's not like much of an ask, I think, to just have that be a little bit more part of the norm. But like you said, it can definitely be used as sort of a dismissive thing. I don't think that's
the problem
frequently the case.
If I may, the problem with all like whether using the tactical they, right? I think it's been referred to as, I've heard it referred to as the tactical they that people use to belittle trans people, right? The problem with that, any kind of solution to that they're just going to use it to belittle trans people. So if asking is a solution, they're going to ask it in a very belittling way. The problem with language policing, right, or term policing, is any term, word, phrase, style can be turned into a weapon and be used against the intended recipient. We see this as a cycle when it comes to how do we refer to people who are less abled, right? The cycle is we choose a word that describes them, and then that word becomes a slur and weaponized, and so we pick a different word, and then it again becomes offensive. It's used as an offensive way, and we pick a new word. And it,
right, but Wick,
yeah,
I think
right.
you're. I mean, like, yeah, degendering exists in language and exists in how you can navigate in conversations. And there's also something to be said about like indexical bleaching of individuals, where like something that can happen in a conversation is that when the going and this happens a lot with names, for example, that you can get a situation where somebody's name is just too difficult to do, or it might just be too complicated, and then they just like reduce it to a simplified version of that without the consent of the individual.
I do that all the time on Discord. When your screen name...
God, I'm sorry. This is... Who the fuck cares? I'm sorry. There's so many more important things for trans people to be talking about. If they, them is the default, some people are assholes, and they're always going to be assholes. Yes, true. And when they are assholes, fuck them. But also, none of this matters, because like right now in the States, there are many trans people that still can't get access to medical care. I don't give a fuck about any of this shit. This is why I fucking hate xenogender talking points. I don't care. I'm not interested, because there are important things to talk about. And I'm sorry, this isn't it. This just makes everyone, including like centrist people, just get turned off. It's so frustrating.
I don't understand where
Thank you.
I'm a little
I gotta push back on that and say
I'm a little confused about like what invoked that reaction. Can you contextualize that for me?
Did you watch the whole panel?
I'm here. I don't.
No, did you watch the whole panel? Like where you are? I'm not asking derisively.
I watched bits and pieces, but specifically what I'm asking here is that Wick had a concern about something. You reacted a particular way to my response. I don't know where it's coming from. I'm just helping.
I think I reacted that way to Wick's response actually, but
did I trigger?
Yeah, I'm just trying. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, help me understand. That's all I'm trying to say. So it was like, yeah.
So we just had a whole panel about xenogender, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the whole point that I was making in the xenogender thing, that it's not that important. I think it's a silly point, and that I don't think it's part of the trans conversation, and I don't think it's very interesting. And that I really want to focus on topics that matter to like trans lives actively right now. In the States, there are some very pressing issues for trans lives right now. And so when this back and forth was happening, I was just sitting here listening, and I was like, nobody cares. This isn't important. This is like, obviously the default is they, them. And that's like worrying about like, oh, is it a little bit dismissive and stuff, is just like such an aside that it just, when people hear this, they just cringe internally. Because it's like homeowners association energy being brought into like a trans conversation. When it's like, we don't have time to worry about like what color our lights are. We're like trying to like get our lights turned on, you know?
So maybe I can approach it different. Maybe I can approach it a different way so you can kind of understand like why I'm not really agreeing with what you're saying here. Currently right now in a lot of school districts, there are policies that are actively coming about that if a teacher cannot have certain pronouns and certain identifications that are inconsistent with a student's academic records. So a situation can come up where you have a student whose name is William in their all their academic records, but they're known as Lily casually, and a teacher cannot use Lily as a matter of school policy. So that is something of a level of linguistic violence that's just currently being allowed to happen. And this is manifesting also with pronouns. So you have situations where parents are saying like, I think it's unfair and unjust, and we had to change this so that if my child identifies as she, her in school, but he, him at home, he, him takes precedent over she, her. So I think that there is something to say about linguistic violence that's within public education as a matter of policy. And this is something that school boards can do separate from state policy. They can do this just from majority of a vote. Like they can change the policy of
I don't
how
even know what
students
linguistic
communicate
violence
overnight.
means. What is linguistic violence? Like what is that?
Do you understand what a microaggression is?
Yes, I do understand.
Then,
that's why I was kind
like,
of thinking something like that.
microaggressions are quite frequently done.
Why are
in
we
the
attaching the
form
word
of linguistic...
violence? Why are we calling it violence?
Because it is violence. It is an
How is it
aggressive
violent?
action toward another person because it creates a harm.
Yeah, but something that creates harm isn't necessarily violence, right?
Why not?
Because that's not how we use the word violent.
It is, though.
That's-
We use the
so
word
you're
we
trying
use the
to
word
say-
violence to talk about people causing harm to one another all the time.
So my suspicion, when people tend to use words like violence, right? When they tend to use these types of words, they're not using it because they think it's the most accurate. They're using it because it's the most morally loaded. That's why they're using the word
No,
violence.
I mean we can. Indexical bleaching
Yes.
is linguistic violence, and whether you like disagreeing with the word violence seems a little bit semantical. But I mean, maybe you can elaborate what that like.
But
Why you have taken
fighting
with
for
that?
the word being violence, fighting for saying no, we should be able to call it linguistic violence is just as semantic as saying why are we using the word violence? When you think of violence, you think of physical violence, like a murderer, like someone like beating up someone, like that's like the common thing. And so if we're gonna switch and we're gonna change definitions,
I mean,
that's just going to become a whole nother thing.
I mean,
Like
I
a
can.
microaggression. They call it a microaggression. So then you can say like linguistic aggression.
I mean,
Are you worried this is turning people away, Aerotite?
So yeah, it's not semantic for me, right? It's about framing and rhetoric and like moral bludgeoning, right? So my concern is that we take issues that are issues, right? Small issues are still issues. They're just small issues, right? And we attach a bunch of really morally loaded words to it when there are big issues that also need to be talked about. And my concern is that when you attach big moral words to the smaller things, that it loses the power that maybe is utilizable about the big type issues, right? And so
I
my
can
issue isn't pedantic.
Ochiland. So like the thing that maybe I didn't explain what's happening. There are districts as a matter of policy to misgender trans people. And that's something that I would describe and other people within the DEI field would describe as linguistic violence. Now, you may not agree with the word violence there, but we can agree that if there is a policy in a school district that says it's okay as a matter of action to misgender somebody, then I think that's something we should be concerned about.
Maybe call it bullying?
Don't you think that if we were able to like take care of the core issues around trans people, that issue would fall automatically through it?
Well, can I just make sure I'm understanding the policy? I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding you, Joe.
Sure,
so what's occurring in the school board from what I'm understanding? Because I'm not familiar with the case.
Sure.
Go ahead and explain if you want to.
Yeah. So Tanner Cross is one of the individuals kind of sparked this within conservatism. If you want to look up that case, it's a good place, a good jumping point for this. That's not to you, Erudite. That's just like broadening for people who watch.
No, I appreciate it. I'm looking at it.
Gotcha. So basically what happened was you had a high middle school gym teacher who felt that a student, like he's not going to call a student pronouns that are inconsistent with their sex assigned at birth because they feel like that's lying to a student. That expanded to policies in a bunch of different school districts where essentially that teachers are not allowed to gender students that's inconsistent with their academic records, and particularly leads up to their sex assigned at birth. Yeah, and what happens is there's two avenues of this fight. One avenue of this fight is we should go with the sex assigned at birth. We should go with what's on the government records, even if that's inconsistent. And then the other avenue of that fight is that we need to change policy so that you have questions like, what are your pronouns? Have questions like, what is the name that you go by? And that's kind of like the two avenues oversimplified that are currently happening.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, teachers were intentionally misgendering, and then policy was updated to basically enforce misgendering?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I still don't know if I would call it linguistic violence. What I would call it is active bigotry, right? Like harmful bigotry in the space.
So what utility does active bigotry have that linguistic violence for you does not encapsulate?
So a couple of things. Number one, it's not violence, right? It's shitty, but violence is a pretty specific thing, and there's a reason why we there's a reason why we have words for things. the reason why I'm going with bigotry, there might be better words for it. Just to be clear, I'm not like hell bent on bigotry because I just came up with something off the top of my head. There's
Sure, so then you
even
might not
Erudite's always
you're not
hell
committed
bent
to
on
violence, too,
bigotry. Let's
just
be
to open
honest.
that door.
But
Hold on, sorry, what did you say, Joe?
So then maybe, I mean, it just sounds like you might not be fully committed to the word, to like the term, but maybe it just seems like you need a bit more information. I could send you stuff your way.
I'm not interested in the violence stuff. The reason why isn't semantic, it's ideological for sure, right? Which is that violence should be reserved for violence, right? So in cases where trans people are being beat up and hate crimed actively because they're trans, I want to call that violence, right? Because it's physical harm being done to a body because it's a trans body. But when we're talking about things like really shitty, awful policies, which I'm not disagreeing, I'm concerned that when we levy the words like violence, what happens to people who are like on the fence or uncertain about this are like, well, that seems like a bit of like an overstatement of what's going on, and then they get pretty sussed out about the like intentions of what's driving us.
Sure.
I think it's that. I think it's
to be a little more
point.
clear,
not semantic,
perhaps.
it's like optics.
Yeah,
It's
to
more
be
like
to be a little more clear
I
about that,
think
it's
that,
very
like,
just real quick,
sure.
quick, please.
I'll
It's
do
just very important when we say there is violence being done to trans people. What people hear is the violence being done to trans people is in the physical violence, not violence is being done to trans people. Oh, they misgendered me. Right, it's very important. We that is clearly communicated, and when we conflate violence to mean more than physical violence, it becomes harder to communicate that succinctly, clearly, and directly.
Well,
But
people-
I wanted to.
I would recommend, and a name that I would recommend, because it looks there's no road here. So
Okay.
I'm just recognizing we can probably just move on.
Sure.
But I think
I don't want
a
you book
name
that. I don't want you book. If there's no road, I don't want you
super
book.
quickly?
a name that I would recommend is Dr. 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙. He is a linguistic professor up in New York City. He's more than happy to have conversations with people about these things, in particular linguistic violence. I would highly recommend maybe you even reaching out, talk to him. He's very accessible.
I will absolutely do that, but I want
I
to
am when it comes to like really articulate.
absolutely do that. I want to let 𝕵𝖎𝖎𝖙 have some space here. Go ahead.
So I want to bridge the gap between you two because I think both of you are making a really good point. So Joe, what you're talking about, like as someone who grew up in Mississippi, public school policy and the policies of our school, that is politics and that is important. And we could have an hour, you should have that, Wick, like an hour-long panel on like how these issues intersect with racial discrimination in schools. So I really see how that's touching there. I think it's really well said. I think I dismissed that without really thinking through the entire thing. Tyler, what you said that I really reacted to is you're talking about this tendency, I think, at least I see in leftist circles, to really focus on these small, not smaller, but really focus on justice in specific cases that pit two competing interests against each other. A really good example is like the Leah Thomas and the swim thing, right? You've got women, cis women, who do not have enough opportunities, and then you've got trans athletes who are discriminated against or looking for opportunity here. We love talking about those edge cases. The real variable in what I may be reading into this, but what I think you're talking about is us focusing on a bigger picture, right? Like a story just broke during this panel that two competing judges have come out and basically banned mifepristone, which is an abortion drug, which and a anti-trans group is actually behind this successful lawsuit, right? This is the major variable. This is the big picture that we need to be thinking about. Like there's this right-wing assault through the court on our rights, and we need to be working together on structural, bigger things. That's the direction I want to go. Like stopping thinking about specifics, start thinking about the movement as a whole and attacking the major variables.
So just to be clear, it's just two things. If I could just clarify what I was trying to say. So there's the first thing that you outlined, which is like, let's talk about the bigger issues. But the issue is people who fixate on that will then dismiss the fact that like local changes probably broadband improves lives more directly and more efficaciously than like even federal changes, because federal changes are pretty low resolution and slow to trickle out. So I'm not dismissing local changes. My issue with the language optics framing specifically itself is that I think it turns off all the individuals that are the sway votes. And I think turning off sway votes is a really bad idea. For example, what happens in any human interaction is, say I was like, guys, you know, I'm not going to give a name because I'm going to say something really spicy. You know, this is a made up name. Brian raped me. And everyone's like, oh my God, right? Brian raped you? And then when we get into the details, it turns out that Brian called my phone twice and sent me like an unsolicited dick pic. Inappropriate behavior. But now what's going to happen, because I use such extreme language, is that the actual problem, which is sending unsolicited dick pics and like kind of sexual harassment, is going to be wholly dismissed because I had to jump the gun and call it the most morally condemning thing. And I see this happen all the time. This is actually why a lot of like moderate conservatives hate the Trump group, because they just call every person a pedo. They call every trans person a pedo, and they're like, that's not even what the word means, right? That's not what the word means. It's like the moral indictment tends to cause the most like swing vote people to just like wholly disregard the situation because it was so overblown that you're like, oh, well, I thought I was getting morally ready for rape. And now that I find out that it's like just an unwanted dick pic, I don't care like at all now. That's well my second concern. Yeah.
Well said.
Something, not to a little punch here too. Hold on, a punch, a gentle push. Is I think that and you knocked on this too in what you're playing, Bre, is that, or Brianna, excuse me, that
you can call me Bre. You can call me Bre.
Yeah, sorry, it's force of habit. it's like something that concerns me is that people underestimate the power of, and like basically that we can't do things from the top down, at least in my opinion. When it comes to policy, these things have to kind of be a bottom up. Examples of this could be like marijuana, for instance, where like if you have enough local initiatives, enough local advocacy that does lead to like a overarching goal, then there might be better influence at the federal level for these things.
Joe.
Let me let my plan. Like the thing when I speak specifically about the situation with misgendering students and pronouns is that is something that is separate from the political process that people know it to be. For example, like people don't understand that a school board has incredible power over what they can and cannot do. So for instance, a school board can just come together tomorrow and fire the superintendent. They can change policy for the entire district in a meeting, in an information session, without any contribution to the public. And that's a political apparatus and a political monster that's totally different than telling people, oh, just go out and vote for this individual.
Right. I have to go in like 2 seconds. Could I give you a quick response? And then I'm so sorry. I have another panel, so I have to run away.
And go ahead.
I agree with you. I think what you're outlining here is really, really interesting and something that I haven't like thought as much about. So I appreciate you for bringing that to me. What I'd be curious to know is, and I don't know, maybe this is like my bigotry against old white people. These old superintendents on the school board, how likely do you think that they're going to be like NIMBY kind of like milk toast liberals? What do you think is the chance? Because I'm putting it like 85 plus.
I have no idea. There hasn't been an actual survey of superintendents on political leanings. I have no information to answer that question.
Sure. Okay. Maybe again, this is my bias showing. Based on like a lot of systemic stuff that we see like going on in situations, a lot of times the people that like rise to these like highest bureaucratic positions tend to be like older white like men and women. So it might not be them. These people I think are going to be really turned off by highly inflammatory language, basically.
Well, I mean,
because they're very NIMBY a lot of time. But again, I could be wrong, and it might not even be the case that these are the people.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that what superintendents that at least from I've observed is that if things are keeping on, they're going to keep on. And if there's something that the board wants to do as a matter of policy, they tend to support it. It took a village just to get Brian or Superintendent Ziegler out from Loudoun County, despite the fact that it was shown that he was negligent towards students. And it took a village of like of just like people saying like this is somebody you have to like get out of here. So basically the point I'm trying to make here is that generally speaking, I would say that superintendents are just they're no different than the board itself that's supporting the policy, because superintendent isn't going to do anything in terms of like saying like why just like they'll just say I disagree with the board, but it's the board's decision. Superintendents are kind of worthless in that aspect.
So I thank you for being here, and I understand you gotta go. So yeah.
07.
Yeah.
Have a good day, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
One thing, and then we do have to kind of close this out. I do have matters in the real world that I need to attend to. So a response to the bottom up versus top down. I would point to the integration of schools in the South as a successfully top down enforced solution. They had to bring in the military, the National Guard, to enforce this change. If we left it to the local bottom up style, it would not have happened. It needed to be from the top down, right?
No, we can also see at the same time that during Brown 1 and 2 that an overwhelming majority of Black teachers got fired in Southern schools while the integration of public schools was happening. Like, one of the problems that the federal government has is that they are beholden to states' rights to an extent. So you'll have a situation where we will bus kids and bring the National Guard when necessary so that these little Black boys and girls can go into schools, but then they'll allow districts just to fire Black teachers en masse in the face of integration.
I mean, it's not perfect, but like even a bottom-up solutions have issues, right? That we can see when the federal government steps in to kind of mess with it, right?
Yeah, and remember, Wick, like we didn't get integration as a matter of public policy in the United States. If it were up to the United States, we would still be segregated. We still have segregated schools. It wasn't through Supreme Court. It was through Supreme Court decision that then pushed people into that direction. Not necessarily. And again, like this is not to diminish the local organizations, specifically ones in my state that were advocating for integration schools, but it's recognizing that the temperature at the time when it came to integration just was not there, because the argument was a little bit more nuanced in Black circles and white circles, but that's a total
tangent. We can't go any further. I do need to end. It's 9 o'clock. I'm going to be late for my stuff, right? I really, really apologize. I know.
Wick
Thank
is
you.
going to go see Mario movie. And he's going to think on his sin of mispronouncing Worcester.
Speaking of that, Wick, could you pronounce my Reddit name?
Let's not go that way. So thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Hey, I will mute you all. Thank you for coming out, gang. Thank you for coming to my show, to my audience. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get my subscriber count up. Let's keep super chatting. If you're watching this on Twitch and you like what you see, throw some bits my way, throw some subs my way. I gotta eat, gang. Really appreciate all of you for being here. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing a special Saturday stream with Sunday. We're going to be watching the debate between Katie, Max, and Smith. And our last co-stream was well received, so we are trying it again. So tune in tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on YouTube.
Does it have a name yet?
No, we this is a new thing. We're trying it. People really liked
the Wickering Hours.
The Wickering Hours. I don't know what we're gonna call it, but we're trying it. Gang. So
Special
tune in
education.
tomorrow, 6 p.m. We're gonna rate out to Miss Millie because I promised her I would. So give me a sec. Remember when you get there to spam those emotes if you got them. Tell her Wick sent you. And wait, bye everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Well, thank you for being here, gang.